Okay, if everyone would take their seats. Can you hear me? Shh. Actually, maybe you can help. Is the mic on, everybody? You can all hear? Um, Wonderful. Um, well, I'm Senator Lonnie Hancock. I represent this part of the world in the California State Senate. And I want to welcome all of you to today's forum, and thank you for being here. I'm pleased to be holding this forum with Assemblymember Bill Quirk, who represents the Hayward area, and also we're expecting Assemblywoman Nancy Skinner, who also represents part of this area. We have embarked on a new era in California corrections. We are changing course, hopefully in a way that will increase public safety, end victimization of all kinds, and change lives for the better. At the same time, we think it's going to free up precious resources in the state to invest in the things that keep people safe and engaged in their society: education, job creation, and those kinds of things. Today, we're going to talk about how we can do it and hear from some of the people that are working on the policy issues and the practices that will enable us to move forward together. The morning session on reentry and integration will focus on effective policies and practices. The afternoon section, coming home, addressing violence, trauma, and physical health, will be convened by Centerforce, which is an organization that's been around for a long time, serving incarcerated and formerly incarcerated people. They're going to look at the disparities in health, mental health, and other care for people reintegrating in the community, and especially in light of the potential impact of the Affordable Care Act, which is just being implemented. So we're going to hear today from policymakers, from pathfinders, from innovators, and welcome all of you to share ideas with us as well. One of the things we're asking is that if you have a question of any of the speakers, we'll have cards that are going to be passed out. We're going to ask you to write down your question, and we can kind of put questions together on the same topic and make sure that we get as many answers as possible. I want to really thank Assemblyman Quirk for his involvement in this and for his staff for helping to put together a number of the panels. I really want to acknowledge and thank my staff, who has made this a labor of love and a priority for them for several months. And if they're here, Terry Waller, Nathan Rapp over in the corner, and Melissa Mail and Carolina Salazar. Carolina's going to be our timekeeper today, so she'll be the bad person. But she will hold up the little cards because we have lots of people, and we want to be able to move through the program quickly. And as I said, I'm also grateful that Assemblywoman Skinner is concerned about these issues. She serves on the Public Safety Committee as well, as both Assemblyman Quirk and I do in our respective bodies. So we're going to have 3 panels this morning. We'll have a break after the first panel. And please let us know your questions and comments. I'd like to know if either Assemblyman Quirk or Assemblyman Skinner have some comment?
I'll just thank Senator Hancock, my staff, and her staff, and all the other people who helped organize this. Thank you.
I think it's on. I'm happy to be here, and I think it's very important that, or I think the opportunity today is to hear from and learn from some areas outside our own county into what they are doing and giving us some insight as we move ahead and clearly deal with the population that's been realigned, meaning put into county facilities, but also the population in our state prisons that are being released in our communities. So I really appreciate the work of both Senator Hancock and Assemblymember Quirk's office to put this together, and look forward to learning lots from your questions and from the panelists. Thank you.
Thank you. So we're going to begin by hearing from some formerly incarcerated individuals who will give us some insights on the challenges that they face. And this is going to be facilitated by Linda Evans from All of Us or None.
Thanks to everyone attending this reentry forum today, and thank you to the organizers, specifically Senator Lonnie Hancock and Assemblymember Quirk, for including the voices of formerly incarcerated people in the discussion. We want to provide a framework for this morning's session that starts with 4 basic premises. Number 1, we urge everyone here in all your daily work to refer to people involved with the criminal justice system as people. People on parole or probation, people who have been to prison or jail, formerly incarcerated people, people with conviction histories. We reject language, very disrespectful language, that defines us by our past mistakes, like ex-offender, ex-convict, or felon. Number 2, as people who have experienced the criminal justice system directly, we are experts about its impact on our lives and about possible solutions. We urge you all to view us and to treat us not as clients, but as colleagues and partners with valuable expertise to share and with a perspective of problem solving so we can work together. Number 3, we place an overall emphasis on restoration, the need for restoration of our basic civil and human rights, restoration and reunification for our families and our communities, and restoration and transformation of ourselves as individuals. Restoration is healing. Number 4, California's criminal justice realignment has created much greater responsibility and therefore greater opportunity for counties to change direction. From a destructive addiction to punishment towards restoration and restorative justice. We believe that 32 of the 58 California counties are moving in a backward direction by expanding their county jails, including San Francisco and San Mateo County. So we appreciate everyone's presence today, indicating a new direction, as Senator Hancock outlined. For our first panel, I would like to introduce Eddie Zhang and Manuel LaFontaine. Eddie and Manuel, please tell us a little bit about yourselves, how the challenges you faced inside and after prison led you to your recommendations for change. What must be in place for people to succeed in their communities and end the cycles of reincarceration?
Thank you. Can people hear me back there? Okay, beautiful. So my name is Manuel LaFontaine, and as Linda said, I'm a formerly incarcerated person. I'm a father, I'm an uncle, and I'm a son. I think that's very important as we move forward, that even though I'm a formerly incarcerated person, and that was perhaps what has labeled this conversation or providing resources, it's important to us to look at us as human beings. So I'm also a member of All of Us or None. which is a national organization of formerly incarcerated people fighting for the full restoration of our rights, which is a project of legal services for prisoners with children.
Okay, we're going to try to figure out, I don't know if there's so many people here, we set off the smoke alarm or what.
But too hot, huh?
Unfortunately, the alarm is going off because someone attempted to open up the emergency exit.
Okay, we're ready. We'll try again, everybody. So,
Okay, so again, my name is Manuel. I'm a member of All of Us and None, which is a national organization of formerly incarcerated people who are fighting back for the full restoration of our civil and human rights, which also is a project of LSPC, it's a 30-year, actually 35-year organization, legal services for prisoners with children, that have been championing the rights of people inside, predominantly women, since they've been the most impacted as of recently. And I think it's important to recognize as we frame this conversation that many of us are a product of our environment. So as someone who was caught up in the street madness, it was a lot had to do with being profiled as a young kid. So it started even before I got incarcerated, being profiled, being put in police database, field interrogation cards, that led eventually to me being incarcerated. So we have to sometimes figure, before we even get to the part of being incarcerated, that sometimes policies that stop people from being incarcerated, being funneled into the prison system, are very much important. The only thing that separates me from the 70%, right, and others like me who've been successfully been able to start a new life post-incarceration is that we had a safety net. I had a safety net that helped me when I didn't have much resources. When I didn't have housing, I had a family that took me in. When I didn't have employment, I had someone that could provide food and the basic needs for me to survive. And I think the other 25 to 35% who are also doing good can attest, can confirm that without a viable support system, we might be not that different than the people who go back. One thing that's very important as also we move forward is that the minute we've done our time, we're off parole, probation, or any type of mandatory supervision, right? Any type of paperwork, there's a presumption of rehabilitation. For we didn't get sentenced to lifelong punishment. And the civil disabilities that were triggered once I pleaded no contest. Once I pleaded, can people bear as I still speak? Or? Yes. Okay, that's important, right? A safe and secure community. So what's important is that these civil disabilities were in the form of housing, trying to find housing that questions now in almost all applications. Have you ever been arrested? Have you been convicted? Employment, that question's there, right? And it has different variations. Ever been arrested? Have you ever been convicted of a felony? Ever been convicted of a misdemeanor? And these questions are not just to those two. They're also in public benefit applications. If you're trying to get TANF or the supplemental needs. They're also in financial aid applications. They're also in life insurance questionnaires. Have you ever been incarcerated? Because there's this assumption that if you've done time, your life expectancy it's reduced a lot. So it's important for us to recognize that even though many of us want to be successful, we have all these barriers facing us. So we need to provide real solutions. We need to provide secondary support systems. And it comes in the form of partnering up with each other, with different county departments, with elected officials, to figure out how do we create policies that are sound, that have teeth, right? So I really support those elected officials that have worked closely with formerly incarcerated people to try to develop comprehensive policies that work. It's important that we end all forms of discrimination we face because of our conviction history. This is essential because whatever we do that addresses the symptoms of it without trying to get to the root causes, any discrimination will be shortcoming in the end. And I think the last thing I want to talk about is something that's tangible that we can do right now. It's a bill right now that's in front of the governor's desk, AB 218, that Assemblyman Dickinson introduced, and as it was passed, elected officials became informed and voted for it. Most of them did. And we need to have the governor sign it. He has to the 13th, so I urge all of us to sign, to call the governor, and we can provide numbers later on. Thank you.
Well, happy New Breath, everybody. My name is Eddie Zhang, and I'm a program director for the CYC, the Community Youth Center of San Francisco. And have been serving on the Reentry Council in San Francisco for 4 years. And I just currently got appointed by the mayor of San Francisco to be on the Southeast Community Facilities Commission, to working with the Public Utilities Commission in the Southeast sector of San Francisco. And I'm also a board member of the Chinese for Affirmative Action. And I'm also a soon-to-be father to a beautiful daughter I'm expecting. I'm saying all that because I keep asking myself the question, how did I get here, right? So for me, I was an immigrant from China. My parents wanted me to have a better future, a better career choice, a better education in the United States to fulfill the American dream because my grandparents been here for a long time. But when I came over, what immediately hit me was the language barrier, the cultural differences, and the generation gap. And I wasn't able to really assimilate to this culture and really appreciate the sacrifices my parents and grandparents made for me. So I ended up, got on the path of this criminal activity, at the age of 14. And at the age of 16, I was charged as an adult and sentenced to life with the possibility of parole for committed a crime of kidnapping to commit robbery. So I spent 21 years of my life in the system. 19 years of my life I spent from 16 to 35. I was incarcerated in the state prisons. And immediately that after, I spent 2 more years in the federal custody under deportation proceedings. So I grew up in the penitentiary. When I first entered in the penitentiary, I didn't really speak English much and understand the culture. But it was inside the prison system that I was able to learn English, get my GED, get my college degree, and was able to really learn about taking responsibility for my actions, understanding the trauma and the pain and suffering that I have caused to my victims and also to my family and to the community. However, I couldn't have done that without the support from my family, as well as the community and people who reached out to me and who encouraged me to do well inside the prison system. And I was able to prevail even without all the resources and support from the prison system, right? Specifically, when you look at me, I'm Asian, right? So Asian and Pacific Islander are not in the same breath as African American, Latinos, and many of the whites and other population that who could be think of being in prison because of many of the model minority myth that happened. So for me, it's definitely opportunity for me to have a voice, to really talk about the big population of people who are incarcerated that they don't have a voice because they couldn't even speak the language or they don't understand the culture, they don't know what happened, right? So for me, it's definitely addressing that. When I first came out, the challenges for me definitely is I don't know which day that I would be deported, right? Which day I would be separated from my family, the family that I really want to unify with after spending 21 years of my life inside the system. That's one challenge. The other challenge is technology. When I first entered the system, just like many of the life-term prisoners or former incarcerated people, the technology changed drastically. So I didn't know anything about cell phone, any of the computer stuff. I didn't know anything. So that's a big challenge for me. Geography is another big challenge for me, to understand where to go and how to get there after so many years being disconnected from the community. And then the other thing is about how to be socialized with people. How to really engage the people because so much has changed, right? The different generations have changed. So for me, those are some of the challenges. But the great thing about me is that I was able to really excel as long as I know that the people in the community really care about me, right? So one of the things that I really want to emphasize as a solution is that we need to really invest in more education and stop the pipeline from the school to the prison industry complex. That's one thing. The other thing is to really understand that even though the people who committed crimes, made mistakes under whatever circumstances, they're part of the community. They never left the community. They were always part of the community, and to reduce recidivism, to really address public safety, we need to invest in those people who haven't been able to make the right choices for whatever reasons. The reentry has to start the day of arrest. That's when the reentry has to start. And restorative justice should be on everyone's mouth every day, right? Instead of prisons and punishments, restorative justice. That's what we need to employ. And we really need to talk about how do we as individuals and leaders or officials, city and governments, how do we really take a stand and really to say that, I have believed that in order for us to have a better community, safer community, a better future for our youth, we need to really step up to really address stopping this massive incarceration and deportation of immigrants and the people who are involved in this system. So for me, I'm really grateful for Senator Hancock. I know she doesn't know this, but she was one of the senators who written numerous letters for me when I was going to parole board. So I want to thank you, Senator Hancock. Right? And I also want to thank all the people who are formerly incarcerated, who really came out, despite whatever label they were labeled by society, despite all the people who kind of ripped them off, that they were able to excel and succeed. And not only that, but they are able to give back to the community, to be change agents in our community. We should continue to encourage people like that and love them, provide the proper resources, and continue to work together as strategic partners and continue to make sure that we stop people from going into the system, in the prevention end, and continue to address the issue that are needed to provide the support so they don't recidivate into the prison. Thank you.
Well, I want to thank you all. We're going to have a series of these sort of grounding reality checks as we move through the day. And our first panel is on an overview of reentry and realignment, and especially research that has been done on some of the successful strategies, and just an overview of where we are now with realignment as it affects corrections and rehabilitation. I'm going to introduce all four of our panelists, and then I think we'll just move from one to the other as they are on the program. Riken Garrett, who will be first, is currently a research fellow at the Public Policy Institute of California. He's also a professor of sociology at UC Davis, and he previously worked as Assistant Secretary of Research in the California Department of Corrections and Rehabilitation. So he has experienced this from all sides, and PPIC is currently doing some helpful research for us on how realignment is progressing. Barbara Bloom, to his left, is a professor of criminology and criminal justice studies at Sonoma State University and co-director of the Center for Gender and Justice. And she's going to talk a little bit about a section of corrections that is often overlooked, which is women prisoners and their children, and what some of the things are that we can do there. She's a past president of the Western Society of Criminology and has published many articles and books. Keneal Fraser is a senior policy analyst with the Advancement Project in LA. And for those of you who don't know, that for me has been a very inspiring organization to learn more about. They have walked the walk, they have studied what to do, and they have some very, very inspiring models of how we have to proceed to bring the whole community together to support our young people. And then finally, David Ball, to my right, next to Senator Assemblyman Quirk, is a professor at Santa Clara University School of Law and currently co-chair of the Corrections Committee of the American Bar Association's Criminal Justice section, and has also studied many of these important topics. So I'm going to turn it over to the panel, and we'll start with Wright.
Thank you very much. It's a real privilege to be here. I want to thank Senator Hancock and Assemblymember Quirk and their staffs for putting this session together. I'll try and scooch forward a little bit. So what I'd like to do is kind of address sort of three questions. The first is sort of how did we get here, which is allows me to say a little bit about the recent history of California corrections. Where do we stand now, and kind of what are the policy options sort of going forward? So first of all, how did we get here? Here's just some basic facts. So up until the mid-1970s, California was a worldwide leader in corrections, if you can believe it. We had pretty low recidivism rates. We had a substantial investment in our correctional system in education and rehabilitative services. And I think this is important. We had a very large research capacity, which is a kind of an indicator, a canary in the coal mine of how well the system was run. During the late 1960s and early 1970s, crime rates in California, as they did elsewhere in the country, began to rise. In 1977, the state passed a determinate sentencing law, which has many elements to it, but the net result of it was that it increased the length of prison terms. It also transformed the parole system as a result of that. And by 2000, 2/3 of the people going into the prison system were coming not from the new commitments by courts, but from the parole system. Between 1980 and mid-2000s, the incarceration rate in California tripled, prison population soared, even as serious crime in the state and in the country began to fall from the 1990s onwards. During this time, research and rehabilitative services and education in the prison were cut drastically as policymakers and many researchers, criminologists, came to believe that nothing works in regards to offender treatment. And then in the last decade and a half, we have been kind of dealing with the consequences of having designed our system in this way, and the key consequences being extremely high rates of recidivism measured as a return to the prison, overcrowding and challenges to the constitutionality of the system, as well as, of course, the sheer costs of this system. So where do we stand now? Well, in the last few years, the state has taken some steps towards reforming its prison and parole system, with the most dramatic change, of course, being AB 109, public safety realignment. The goal of public safety realignment was to, as I say, shrink the incarceration footprint of the state. And it seems to be having that result. Prison populations have dropped dramatically, not enough, according to the court. But realignment is posing enormous challenges to counties, and it gave those counties a great deal of autonomy to decide how to respond to this new obligation. There's lots of potential for experimentation and innovation. Unfortunately, there's no money that came along with realignment to track what counties are doing and what the effects of those strategies are going to be on outcomes. And so a lot of that's going to remain sort of invisible unless we can change that situation. So then the third question is sort of what are the options? And I'm going to be quite general here. I would say there are sort of 4 options that we can consider. One is incapacitation, which is essentially continuing to incarcerate at high levels. You might say this is business as usual, but actually there's some research that suggests that there's a kind of an optimal level of incapacitation, and that as you go beyond that, then you have undesirable kinds of effects. And certainly some counties are investing more in some of their resources in expanding incapacitation. We don't really know with any great certainty as a research community exactly what that ideal threshold of incarceration is, but the fact that the counties are varying quite a bit in the approach that they're taking will allow us a glimpse into answering that question. The second is enhancing rehabilitative services. So if incapacitation is kind of business as usual, then rehabilitation is sort of back to the future. But that's not really true, because we know a lot more now about rehabilitative services and programs than we did 3 decades ago. We know that programs seem to work best when they target criminogenic needs, that is, the factors that drive people into criminal offending in the first place. We know that the ideal kinds of programs focus on high-risk offenders. But we also know that there's not really any easy fix here. There's nothing off the shelf that we can just purchase and plug in, that a lot of what determines whether or not evidence-based practices actually perform as promised is how they're implemented. And so a lot of attention has to be given to the question of how practices are put into the field. The third is smarter sanctions when people who are in the community behave badly. How do we respond to them? And there's some very interesting recent research that suggests that the most effective kinds of sanctions are those that involve short periods of punishment, but are highly certain. Flash incarceration, which was a remedy made available in AB 109, is a sanction type that was made available in the law, in part to reflect this increasing interest in getting a little smarter with the way in which we apply sanctions. There are lots of other questions that we might ask about what kinds of sanctions work best when people in the community are not behaving in a way that we want to see, other than sending them back into custodial settings. And then the third is the fourth is prevention, and this is something that we don't often talk a whole lot about. There's not been a lot of policy discussion in relation to realignment about prevention, but here it's worth noting that some of the afternoon panels will be talking about ACA, which I think actually holds a lot of possibility for actually increasing health and access to behavioral health and mental health and substance abuse services in counties to the very same kinds of populations that might lead into criminal careers. So there's lots of opportunities to examine how we might build up the kind of protective factors in communities in order to lessen the reliance on the more expensive options. So there's some research that can be helpful, I think, in thinking about what the options are that we should pursue. This work, I would say, is not as definitive as we would always like it to be. It's a starting point, but we should not have complete confidence that if we implement something that it will necessarily produce the gains that it promises. And as a result of that, it's really paramount that we rebuild the capacity to conduct research and put it alongside of the implementation of programs so that we can really have a better sense of what's happening as these various options play out in communities. So thank you.
Good morning, everyone. Can you hear me? I'd like to thank Senator Hancock and Assemblymember Quirk for hosting this forum this morning. And I'm here really to answer the question, what about the women? Because often in these types of discussions, we talk in generalities. And I think it's important to understand some of the ways in which reentry and reintegration challenges women. And even though, women returning to their communities from jails and prisons face some of the same barriers that men do, things like employment, lack of training, lack of educational opportunities, the ability to find safe and affordable housing for women and their children, discrimination both in terms of the ability to get hired in a job, but also because of the status of being a formerly incarcerated woman. All of these issues also impact a woman's ability to reunify with one or more of her children. So it's more nuanced in terms of the way in which these barriers affect women. Additionally, childcare. Childcare is, exceedingly important, and it's very difficult for many women to obtain childcare that's affordable. Access to medical and mental health services, particularly trauma-informed and gender-responsive mental health services. And then I think, as Manuel LaFontaine mentioned, this social support, this safety net. Oftentimes when women go to prison and or jail, their social support systems break down. They become more fragmented in terms of relationships with their families, with their communities, with their peers. And so all of these challenges become what one of my colleagues calls a significant level of burden for many women. I want to talk a little bit about services and about research that supports what we call gender-responsive strategies. And these strategies are grounded in 6 guiding principles, and I'll go through them quickly. They're also listed on page 17 of the booklet. But first and foremost, we need to acknowledge that gender does make a difference. We also have to consider the difference that race, ethnicity, culture, sexual orientation, age makes. We need to consider all of those differences when we create services for women and for girls. We need to create environments that are based on safety, respect, and dignity. And in terms of the gender-responsive research, we emphasized focusing on the least restrictive alternatives to secure custody, because it's very difficult to create a safe environment within a custodial context. In terms of creating the environment, what you're looking to do is create not only physical safety, but emotional safety. So women feel at ease talking about issues, past abuse, issues that are difficult to talk about in environments that do not foster emotional safety. Developing policies and programs that are relational, women are relational beings, programs that promote healthy connections to their children, to their family members, to their significant others, and also to their community. Addressing substance abuse, trauma, and mental health in an integrated fashion. Those of you who are service providers often know that these tend to be separate silos: substance abuse treatment, mental health care, trauma treatment. These issues need to be integrated, and they need to be culturally relevant as well. And providing women with real opportunities to improve their socioeconomic conditions through training, education, apprenticeships programs. Because again, being employed, making a living wage is part of the process of reunifying with one's children. And also extremely important, and part of the discussion here today, is establishing a system of community supervision and reentry with collaborative services. There are some components that are research-based, and the research tells us that what works with women, when you talk about risk and needs assessments, which are part of the whole evidence-based practice construct, the best assessments are women-centered assessments. They're standalone risk and or needs assessments that are strength-based and that take into account the realities of women's lives. I don't have time to talk about the components, but there's been a lot written about now women's risk and needs assessments. Creating individual treatment plans that are based on women's needs and targeting those needs. Assuring that all interventions for women are gender responsive and trauma informed. Another evidence-based practice is coordinated or intensive case management systems that are also strength-based and trauma-informed. And there is one evidence-based case management program called the Women Offender Case Management Model. I did not create the name of that model, but it does provide sort of a blueprint for how to do this kind of case management. And then finally, and I think probably most importantly, is community investment. One of my colleagues said, wouldn't it be great if we could fund communities like we've been funding prisons and jails? And what it really takes is it takes the establishment of these partnerships with the range of community organizations that impact on women's lives, and to establish multidimensional services. What we're talking about is creating a continuum of program and services or a continuum of care for women and their families. And finally, I want to mention, and I think it starts on page 18 of your packet, there's excerpts from the City and County of San Francisco Women's Community Justice Blueprint. As far as I know, and Chief Still may know more than I do, this is the first blueprint, the only blueprint in all of the counties that addresses women's issues, women and realignment specifically. And I just would like to touch on a few of the recommendations that my colleague Barbara Owen and I put forward as part of the San Francisco Blueprint. The first is to integrate both criminal and community services through a collaborative leadership structure. So it's not just about criminal justice services, it's about criminal justice and community services working together. Secondly, developing sentencing and pretrial alternatives by expanding non-custodial and community alternatives. You know, there's been a lot of talk about split sentencing and, you know, how uneven it is across counties. What about, you know, very short sentencing with a longer amount of time with community services? Developing intensive and coordinated case management that follows a woman through every phase of the criminal and or community justice process. Expanding programming that goes along and creates a continuum that may cross custodial, residential, and non-residential settings with a focus on residential and non-residential settings. And then, of course, being a researcher, designing an integrated data collection, evaluation, and oversight process to improve our systems to really find out what is working for women, what is improving their outcomes. And it's not just recidivism, it's going beyond recidivism and looking at the best approaches that support women. Thank you.
I want to thank Senator Hancock and Assemblymember Quirk, and I also want to thank their staff, particularly my former student Malia Vela, who had to deal with me as I was running late due to traffic on 880 North. So thanks to Malia. So I just want to start with a recent quotation from the state auditor last week, who said, "The state does not currently have access to reliable and meaningful data concerning the realignment. As a result, the impact of realignment cannot be fully evaluated at this time." So I want to use that as a sort of jumping off point. You know, there's this issue about getting data at all in order to figure out what works. And as Riken and Barbara have said, the state didn't fund any data reporting or collection. But in some ways, you know, I want to use this as an opportunity to speak more generally about what kinds of data we should be collecting. And at this point, I don't really mean what topics, because I think people are most concerned about crime and recidivism. But what I want to talk about is, in some ways, a deeper question, and in other ways, a more practical question, and that is, what are we talking about when we talk about things like public safety and recidivism, and how can we achieve some consensus on that? So if you take recidivism as an example, it can and does mean different things in various studies and reports, right? It can mean rearrest. It can mean rearrest and reconviction. It can mean rearrest and reconviction on the same offense or on a new one. It can mean reincarceration of any kind, including on a probation or parole violation. You know, we could also consider the absence of recidivism as being desistance from crime. These are all valid definitions of what recidivism means, but you can see that if we have data that's pegged to these various definitions, they're going to be different. So, you know, I'm sure you've all heard about the high rates of recidivism for sex offenders, but, you know, if you ask what recidivism means, that might change our opinion about what exactly saying there's a high rate of recidivism for sex offenders means, right? So if you look at rearrest of any kind, well, that might include some things that relate to the fact that many sex offenders are homeless, right? So they get rearrested for quality of life crimes. I think what we'd be most concerned about with sex offenders is, are they continuing to commit sexual offenses? And if you look at those numbers, they're different than the numbers for sort of general rearrest ones. So that's just a basic definitional point where, unless we're really clear on what it is we're talking about, even with something like recidivism that everyone agrees is important, until we actually have some kind of consensus or agreement on what recidivism means, we're not going to be able to make sense of what data we collect. So I want to, I guess, throw out as a couple of questions, how do we want to define success when we're talking about is realignment a success? Or how do we define rehabilitation when we're talking about whether someone's rehabilitated, right? So does that mean, you could say, is someone desisting from crime? Do they have a job? That would be another way of measuring reintegration. Educational attainment, stable families, stable housing, right? How do we define public safety risks, right? Does that include sort of underemployment? Does that only include commission of new crimes, other measures of instability? And moreover, what is an acceptable risk and what isn't an acceptable risk? So these are things that I think people talk about, and we all know what the words mean, but I guess what I really want to talk about is how can we have some kind of more thoughtful conversation about whether or not we really agree on what we're talking about. So just speaking on the slightly more practical level, I'm of the opinion that the BSCC is in a good place to start if the state's going to collect data and analyze it. And I think we generally want to be able to use data to answer two types of questions. First is, how are people doing over time? This sort of longitudinal question. And the second one is, how is the community doing as a whole, a sort of a cross-section or a snapshot at any given time? I think when we're talking about individual data collection, or we're talking about looking at individual cases, we need two things. First is we need a sort of baseline to figure out where they were before any of these various interventions were done. And then we need some ability to share data across various systems. So even before realignment, and just talking about the criminal justice part of reintegration and reentry, you have police, jails, courts, community supervisions, DAs, and prisons, right? Those are all different agencies. All of them have different data. We, again, want to make sure that they are using similar measurements in similar formats so that they can talk to one another. But there's even, there isn't very much communication going on right now among these various agencies, but there's even less communication to and from service providers giving all kinds of treatment, right? So one thing that I would propose on a practical level is I really think we should refine our pre-sentence reports and have them include a risk needs assessment. And use that as a sort of backbone for offender information management. Virginia does this, and it's pretty effective. It's efficient because you can, there's some parts of information that you just collect one time, and other people can reuse them. You don't have to sort of say, when was your age of first arrest, et cetera, every single time that you process someone. I think that using that as a starting point and then sort of tracking what interventions people get in the system or, in the community, and making sure this information travels from provider to provider, and making sure that the programs someone gets in one place are aligned with the ones he or she receives in another. So if you're getting drug treatment, making sure that the methodology that you got drug treatment for in prison is the same one that you can get in the community. Right, and that you're kept track, that you don't start at chapter 1 just because you enter a new place. When you get released, that your progress is somehow tracked. And this seems like a no-brainer, and I think it should be a no-brainer, but our systems are so complicated and they're so fragmented that this happens all the time. So I think that once we started to solve these problems, then we can actually analyze and say, well, it's not just is this program effective, but is this program effective for women or young people or people with this kind of background? We can do a better job of tailoring programs to people and then also evaluating which programs work. And at the same time, if we aggregate this kind of data, we can get a sense of why things are the way they are in the community and really answer some of the questions that until this point are really answered by people's intuitions about, well, drugs are causing violence, or what are the cumulative effects of various criminal justice policies, et cetera, et cetera. And I'm a big believer in actually looking at the evidence to see what the answers are. But again, those answers and that data really has to, you have to be very thoughtful about how you collect data. It's not just a technical problem. In some ways, it's really more of a definitional one. And so we only have a brief amount of time, and all the panelists, we agreed that we wanted to leave lots of room for discussion. And but I want to encourage you, if you are interested, I've done some writing about what I think some of the problems would be as we move toward more data integration, problems about net widening and things like that. And you can look you can look up some of my writing. It's included in the in materials you've been given. But I guess ultimately, one of the reasons why I'm a fan of data is, and I'm not sure how many of you are familiar with what's called the risk responsiveness principle. But basically what that says is that you really want to give lots of interventions to people who really need it. But it's not the case that what works for those populations is going to work for people who are lower risk. In other words, you can make people worse by giving them more programming if they're low risk. And so, I guess the way of thinking about it is if you put like a choir boy with a bunch of gangbangers, it's not the case that the choir boy is going to get the gangbangers to stop being gangbangers. It's more likely that it's going to work the other way around. That's at least one of the theories behind it. And so what I want, when I'm talking about using risk and data, I think ultimately it's to make sure that we do what's effective and that doing more is not necessarily what's going to be effective for some people. Some people, we should do less for them, and we'll actually all end up being better off as a result of that. So again, I just wanted to raise these questions about, as we talk about data, let's make sure that we understand that there are choices that we make about how to define the various variables that we're measuring. And some of those are actually going to require us really to think about what it is we want, what our goals are, what public safety means, what reintegration means, and what realignment means. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. Can you hear me? Yes. Hi. Thank you. I will echo all the other panelists. Thank you to the Senator and Assembly Member for putting this together, and to their staffs for being so thoughtful in terms of the composition of the panels and the topics we're going to cover. I am from the Advancement Project. I am from down south, so I'm happy to represent Southern California today up here. Advancement Project, for those of you who are less familiar with us, we consider ourselves a modern-day civil rights organization. We are interested in creating large-scale systems change in a number of different arenas, in early education policy, in distribution of public funds, and then the particular area and division I work under is called Urban Peace. And the Urban Peace Division is interested in promoting and pursuing a public health approach to community violence reduction and community safety. And so what that means for our day-to-day work is that we research, develop, advocate for, and try to, in many cases, actually help implement policies and practices that try to address the underlying or root causes of violence and try to move away from the more reactive, suppression-based responses to crime and violence in our communities.
Keneal, can I just interrupt for a second? Can everybody hear her?
Can you hear me? I can. Oh, I'm sorry. Well, let me.
So I think this is one of those mics we have
I will
to get right.
I will get very close.
Yeah, without having the feedback.
Thank you. Thank you for that sound check, Senator. So because we come at this work with a more holistic approach, we actually have a model we call the Comprehensive Violence Reduction Strategy, or the CVRS. And I think they provided in your packet on page 36 a visual which is sort of an overview of this strategy or this model for community safety. And when I say community safety, I should be clear, we don't just mean that we're reducing crime, statistical crime. It means that people in the community actually feel safe and able to engage with their neighbors and pursue whatever life opportunities they want to pursue. So there's the visual in the materials, and I've also included some links that actually provide a framework for neighborhoods that want to try and implement the strategy on the ground. But for this discussion today around reentry policy, I think what's important about our strategy is that we consider there to be 5 key elements to reducing community violence. One of those elements is effective reentry structures and reentry strategies. But just as important as that isolated reentry strategy are 4 other elements that are connected and kind of interwoven in terms of the consequences they have for our communities. So just briefly, the second one would be prevention. This is something that Manuel spoke about, which is that we invest in, on the front end in our communities, making sure that there's opportunities, particularly for youth, to avoid involvement in the criminal or juvenile justice systems. The third would be intervention, which is also a front-end piece, but for people who might have had some contact with the system at some point or may still be involved in some kind of activities that actually encourage violence in their communities. So it means intervening and giving them a pathway out or a way to divert away from that lifestyle. The fourth would be, it's labeled suppression in the diagram, but I talk about it as good policing. Constitutional policing that's actually responsive to the needs of the community, that's focused on problem solving and is not just focused on arrest. And the last piece of this overall model is equitable distribution of resources. But what that really means is that localities, municipalities focus their funds and resources in the places of highest need, so that it's not just an equal distribution across geography. The scale and scope of a problem is matched by the resources attached to it. So it's within this larger framework that Advancement Project approaches this question of what are the most effective reentry policies and strategies out there. And so while we should be concerned about sort of our policies around class incarceration or our policies about the programming that exists within our institutions of confinements, our prisons and our jails, we also need to be mindful about the agencies and the policies and the structures that affect day-to-day life in the communities to which people reenter. Because unless we have communities that are strong and robust on their own, they're not going to be able to provide the supports necessary to assist people who are trying to come back into them. And so thinking about that sort of bigger picture and step back with reentry strategies, there's 3 areas of policy that I'd like to highlight, and some of them are things we've been doing some work down in Los Angeles around. The first is something I think Barbara actually touched on a little bit, which is we need our local governments to support and fund a vibrant community reentry infrastructure. So that means that the CBOs, the faith-based institutions, the culturally competent service providers on the ground who are doing the yeoman's work, the day-to-day work of supporting and assisting people in their transition back into our communities, they need to be funded appropriately, they need to be supported appropriately so they have the capacity to assist those people. But it goes beyond the funding piece, and this was Barbara's point, is that there's got to be collaboration between those CBOs and the government and public sector agencies that are also serving the same population. And this is something we've really struggled with in Los Angeles, particularly post-realignment and with the realignment funding that's been coming down to us. If we want to create this sort of seamless transition where you are receiving services while in custody and then those same wraparound services and case management and quality of care continues as you get out back into the community, then we've got to find a way for people to be incentivized to work together and coordinate the services they're providing. And so that's a key policy piece or framework to think about when we're thinking about a larger reentry strategy. The second piece I'd like to highlight has to do with changing the paradigm or the mindset with which law enforcement interacts with reentering individuals. And so when I say law enforcement, this means actual patrolling police officers, but also probation departments, other law enforcement departments involved in supervision. Everybody who's here probably recognizes what a tenuous situation a reentering person is in, and that even minimal law enforcement contact, if it goes the wrong way, can be the difference between whether somebody is able to stay on the right path and really reintegrate positively in their community, or whether they end up back incarcerated. And so looking for ways to incentivize police practices and policies that are cognizant of the challenges that reentering people face, training officers in terms of being sensitive and understanding of reentering people's issues is something that can be crucial, because if we can't create communities that people are returning to where hostility with law enforcement is not so great, people are never going to have a chance to succeed. They're going to feel doomed to fail. And I'll mention just a brief example from Los Angeles around this piece. We've had success with a pilot program called the Community Safety Partnership in Los Angeles, which created a special cadre of police officers that are assigned to 3 housing projects in South LA. But these officers are actually promoted not based on arrests. They are promoted on whether they can document that they have actively not arrested somebody, provided referrals, provided support services, and been responsive to the community. And so it's not something, it's small, but it's already documented success in the first year and a half, and it's not something that's specifically reentry focused, but because these communities have large reentry populations, the officers are trained and how to actually deal with reentering persons so that the first response isn't to cite or arrest for minimal conduct. And I know I'm running out of time, so the third area of policy I would just suggest as a non-traditional reentry piece is this infrastructure on the front end, this prevention and intervention infrastructure that we need to invest in the communities, invest in programming for youth, and particularly the intervention piece. I don't know if people here are familiar with what are considered gang intervention workers. In Los Angeles, Urban Peace Academy actually has trained hundreds of intervention workers that are deployed in various communities around LA. And traditionally, these workers are supposed to stop or interrupt an upcoming violent act that's going to happen. But what we found with these professionalized group of intervention workers is that because they have credibility in their community, because they have license to operate, and many of them are formerly incarcerated people themselves, they essentially act as reentry Sherpas, or for lack of a better term. They are able to be a conduit for some of the hardest to reach reentering people, getting them to services and mentorship and supports that they otherwise would not be receptive to. And the city has funded this work and has created an infrastructure for this work through the mayor's office. And so I would just suggest that that's part of a bigger reentry strategy we should all be considering. So I'm out of time and I look forward to the discussion. Thank you.
Thank you. That was really very, very interesting. Do we have any cards with questions? If not, does somebody want to just get started while people fill out their cards? The Assemblyman has a question.
Yes. Professor, you mentioned collecting data on prisoners at the time that they're incarcerated and that they'd sort of have a file that would follow them. Would you elaborate on that a bit?
Sure. So Virginia's got a pretty good offender information management system, and what that is, so I did some work looking at pre-sentence reports in California, and those are largely narrative. They're not really designed to be reused in the same way that something in Virginia is, where they will have sort of lists of known risks and needs that the person has. Some of those can be things that are associated, that never change, like your social history. Some of that could even be something as easy as like, well, I need this kind of medication, et cetera, et cetera. You would want that to travel with someone. I think the advantage of using that as a sort of background is, one, it saves time if that travels with you. You don't have to do an intake interview with someone, and again, being mindful of the fact that offenders and ex-offenders come in contact with a variety of criminal and non-criminal justice agencies. So, I think that assuming that only the right people got information to that, you'd want to know. One of the areas I've looked at is mentally ill prisoners, right? You'd want to know what someone's diagnosis was. You wouldn't necessarily want to count on them to tell you what their diagnosis was. You'd want to know what their treatment regimen was, and you would think that would travel a little bit more. You'd think we would already have that. It's getting better. The offender information management system for the CDCR is getting better, but there are still issues with local officials not knowing sort of what someone has and what their background is when they're coming back. And I think particularly with people who have mental illnesses, you really don't want to have an interruption in treatment. You really want to make sure the transition is as smooth as possible. So those are the kinds of things that you would want to think about. And then you could say, well, give me an update on, how things have been in the last 5 years, and then you could have some kind of tracking of how someone has been doing in order to sort of see how they're doing, and then also what programs in general are like. And SB 678 started to do some of that, where you would have a risk needs assessment done in 3 pilot counties. Then the CDCR stopped really accepting those from the counties. But it was a good idea. It would have saved time and money for everyone. But then organizational politics, I guess, got in the way of that.
Well, what actually happened was CDCR took the position that all the low-level offenders were now the problem of the counties, And we had to fight to keep any money whatsoever into a kind of revamped 678 program. Does everybody know what that is, by the way? Okay, I see some heads shaking, but it was basically a program that that allowed counties to do front-end reentry work, and then for everyone who didn't recidivate and go back to prison or jail, the state would share the savings 50-50 with the county, and the county had to reinvest the savings in more reentry support systems. So it was a great program. We estimate that in the 3 years it was running, 9,000 people did not recidivate, which when you're looking at, that's the number of inmate reduction that the U.S. Supreme Court is demanding that we meet now. That's one reason we here believe very strongly that what I will call the Senate approach to reducing our prison population, which is to have more supports and reduce recidivism over time, is the best way to get there. It's a great program, and hopefully we'll be able to keep it going and grow it. I just had a quick question along that line. Risk and needs assessments are very important. There's no reason they can't be automated in an era of automating all medical records as part of the healthcare reform. And, you know, in terms of our education system, we're also getting the student identifier so that money can follow students and we can keep trying to make sure that people get the supports they deserve. I wonder, Barbara mentioned it, all of you have sort of touched on this in a way. Do we need to improve correctional officer training to administer those risks and needs assessments in a thoughtful way? And does CDCR or any individual state prison or county jail have the ability to do this in a thoughtful, caring way? I don't know.
Someone else, I already spoke. I mean, so yeah, I mean, I think training is really, really important. I mean, and that's one other thing that I think is important to sort of pull back the curtain on data, is that you want to see how the data is collected and how accurate it is before you base any of your conclusions on that. So I think the training is important. I mean, I think there are quality control, mechanisms you can, where you can say, all right, well, did this person rate the same person, inter-rater and intra-rater reliability? But that's certainly a big issue.
Well, and also what happens to it? I've been told by some people in prison, well, we do it and then we stick it in a file. I mean, how does it actually inform a program for people when they're incarcerated so they're prepared for reentry? I think that's an issue.
So in the best of all possible worlds, in my mind, if you did have coordinated case management, you would train your case managers to do the risk and needs assessments, and they would also be the people that would help to develop the individual treatment plans. And again, coordinated case management can start wherever the person is, whether it be in a prison or a jail, and follow that person, as I've said, through the community. But to me, in my mind, it's a case management function.
Yeah, to me, over time, I've come to believe that being well known by a few people who know your strengths and weaknesses and can help you get the supports you need is probably key to this on every level. So I think it's something we need to pay more attention to. There is a question here for Barbara Bloom, who wants to thank you for not forgetting women. We do have 3 women's prisons, or 2 now. One was shut down. And we have, of course, 30 men's prisons. But the question is, what would a gender-responsive community look like? Do you have an example?
This could take me all day. To me, if you're developing a gender-responsive community program, it would be like a one-stop shop it would provide as many services as I discussed in terms of mental health, substance abuse treatment, child care, employment development. If you couldn't do it all on site, you would then refer your women to other community agencies, as occurs in the city and county of San Francisco, so that women are getting the services that they need for themselves and for their children and families.
Yeah,
Senator, I do want to add something, is that, whenever we're talking about coming up with solutions about how do we address this mass incarceration issues and recidivism issues, we need to all get on the same page. That means we need to change our mindset about how do we deal with rehabilitation. How do we deal with really, when we talk about defining what realignment is, defining what is a success story. Well, it's about how do we get our mindset all together. Just for a very quick example, out of the 33 prisons, only one prison has majority of the program out of the whole state of California, which is San Quentin State Prison. Yeah. What about all the rest of the prisons? and we have a dysfunctional mental health system inside the prison. That is a big part of creating more public unsafety in our community. So we're perpetuating that. And when we talk about the correctional officers, yes, they do a part of the work that many of the people, don't want to do or may not want. But it takes only a GED for you to make, with overtime to $80,000, $90,000 a year. Where our professors, the people who are preventing, our future generation to go into the prison system, are paying half of that amount of money. So that's the pipeline to the prison industry complex. So if we need to really get serious about how to tackle this issue, and this is the great time to do it, is that how do we change our mindset and get on the same page across the state of California, and not just in the Bay Area, and I'm very grateful for Chief Wendy Steele for taking the leadership role in this area, in really come up with solutions to really, even including grassroots organizations, the people who really are organizing around this effort to support, what the Senate, what the Assembly do, and Governor Brown's doing.
I totally agree. And I just, in the issue of women, I saw a project in Southern California that was very inspiring to me. It was called New Perspectives, and it was part of a program that was put into law by Senator Carol Liu a couple of years ago. It's a program for women prisoners with children. And those women prisoners are in a secured facility, in this case, an old motel, but a very nice living facility with their children. There's a Head Start program there. There's job training and substance abuse treatment for the women. It's a wonderful program. And the women are united with their children. They're highly motivated. There were 3 programs like this in the state. One got shut down on the grounds that realignment had taken care of those people. In my opinion, we need something like that in every community that has significant numbers of reentering women, because it's wonderful for the women, wonderful for the children. In that regard, we have a question for Keneal. How do you think intervention workers could be implemented in Oakland given its current conditions, and how has the infrastructure for training intervention workers in Los Angeles worked?
Sure. Well, I think we've been very fortunate in Los Angeles under Chief Beck, well, previously under Bratton and now under Beck. LAPD, and I, as a former public defender and defense attorney, I never thought I would say this, but LAPD has been a partner in actually elevating intervention and acknowledging the usefulness of intervention and actually being invested in intervention succeeding in the city of Los Angeles. And because there was buy-in from law enforcement, I think that made a huge difference in terms of the mayor's office being willing to establish what we call GRID, which is the Gang Reduction and Youth Development Office. It's under the mayor, and it funds it contracts out to CBOs to provide prevention services, as well as to CBOs to provide intervention services at various grid sites around the city. And those grid sites are in areas that have been documented to have the highest level of youth system involvement in gang crime. But the way the training actually works, and I think this is why we've been successful in Los Angeles, is that it's not just people ad hoc engaging in intervention or people calling themselves interventionists. It's actually become professionalized in Los Angeles. And so if a CBO wants to get an intervention contract through the grid office, any intervention worker they have has to go through an ongoing and escalating sort of training through what's called the La Vida Academy. It's LA Violence, I forget the acronym, but it's actually run through our organization, the Urban Peace Academy. And so there's a series and levels of trainings that gets more and more in depth the longer you're an interventionist, and you have to have ongoing training every few years to still be contracted with the city to provide intervention services. And because there's that infrastructure, because there's that professionalization, I think there's been buy-in from people who would have been critics at the front end, and there's certainly been ongoing engagement and acknowledgement of the importance of intervention with law enforcement in the city. And so I think one is getting law enforcement on board and seeing the usefulness of intervention or community safety workers is sometimes what they're called. And then two, getting some kind of system in place so people feel comfortable that these are professional safety workers and not people kind of flying by the seat of their pants.
Thank you. Unfortunately, we are now 15 minutes behind schedule. We were going to take a break at 10:15, 10:30. We have some other good questions about how we make the continuum of care real, assuming there's care inside the prison or jail as people re-enter, and also questions about how do we work across counties, since in many of our communities, certainly Alameda and Contra Costa counties, people go back and forth across those county lines all the time to live and work. You should know that we consider this just a beginning, everybody, and we will make efforts to make sure that we can connect all of the people with questions with the experts here, so it'll be an ongoing dialogue and public conversation. But I think right now we're going to take a 10-minute break, and we'll be back at 20 to 11. And thank all the panelists very, very much.
Would you all sit down, please? Now's the time. We got to get started. We're about 20 minutes behind time, like every other meeting I've ever been to. I'd like to thank you all again for being here. I'd like to recognize Rob Bonta as one of our co-hosts, and his district director, Jim Odie, is here today. Perhaps you could say a few words.
I just want to say thank you to the Senator and the Assembly Member for allowing Assemblymember Bonta to co-host this event. This is an area that Senator Hancock is well known as an expert in, and we appreciate the opportunity to participate.
Thank you, Jim. I'd then like to introduce, as facilitator again, Linda Evans from All of Us or None, who will introduce Tamisha Walker from the Contra Costa County Project Safe Return. What? Linda? There we go.
Again, hello. I wanted to just clarify that my name is Linda Evans, and I am a member of All of Us or None, and I, too, have been formerly incarcerated. I was in prison for 16 years. So I am going to join Tamisha on this second panel. It will focus on implementation strategies and how to make best practices happen in the real world. As members of the Safe Return team, Tamisha Walker and her colleagues have made significant changes in Richmond. As women, members of the Safe Return team also face specific challenges that require special solutions, as we heard from the previous panel. Tamisha, I hope you'll tell us a little bit about yourself and talk about how the Safe Return team campaigned against employment discrimination and jail expansion and won a lot of victories.
Good morning. morning, everyone. My name is Tamisha Walker, and I'm a member of the Safe Return Project. Can everybody hear me? Now, okay. I'm a member of the Safe Return Project, and we are based in Richmond, California. We are a group of formerly incarcerated Richmond residents who have been professionally trained in community organizing, research, and advocacy for people just like us returning home to our community. I want to say that I am a mother. I am a full-time student in Contra Costa College pursuing a degree in psychology. I'm a fiance, and I am very, very proud of every one of my coworkers for being able to overcome the many obstacles that face us when we came home to our community from incarceration. I think that it's important to include formerly incarcerated individuals at decision-making tables when people are creating policy that will directly affect us, our lives, our families, and our communities, so that we can have our opinion and input placed in these policies moving forward. I truly believe that you cannot serve someone unless you have clearly asked them what their need is. And so I definitely want to touch on 3 things that the Safe Return Project is very proud of in Contra Costa County. The first thing is in the city of Richmond, our ban-the-box policy. The city of Richmond has passed one of the best ban-the-box policies in the United States. This policy not only eliminates the question, have you ever been convicted of a felony from job applications, but also people who do business with the city of Richmond cannot ask anyone applying for a job with them, have they been convicted of a felony, nor can they do a background check on the individual applying for the job unless it is a state-mandated position. So we are very proud of this. We believe that it will create opportunity. The city of Richmond is definitely small, but we can create a lot of change. We also are definitely on board and have been trying to encourage the governor to sign AB 218, which is fairness in government hiring. We would ask that everyone here also support that because it will create job opportunities across California, so that men and women returning home in any part of this state will be able to have an opportunity to present themselves and gain employment and support their families. The other thing that we're proud of is the First Stop Welcoming Centers that came out of the realignment campaign that the Safe Return team, in partnership with different CBOs and our immigration campaign, we combined with our reentry campaign because we believe that we are powerful together. We were able to get some great wins. Funding to come down to the communities that will be receiving these residents is very important. People who are on the ground actually communicating with these people on a daily basis, people like me, are important in our reentry phase. And the First Stop is important because for me, it was really stressful traveling to Oakland, Antioch, Concord, San Francisco, Marin County to be able to gain services to be able to be successful in my reentry. We believe that a central location to house all information and on-site services is important for formerly incarcerated people. It is not easy reentering into society because of all the barriers and also the trauma that we have suffered for being locked up and separated from our family over long periods of time. The other thing that the Safe Return team and our community is proud of is the delay in the jail expansion, the West County Jail Facility expansion. We're proud of this because we believe that that funding could be used in different ways to support communities and individuals coming home versus creating a facility that will actually add more jail space for individuals in the event that they come against barriers, cannot change their life, and return back to incarceration. We want to thank our sheriff for really listening to us and being able to give the communities a chance to create change before any expansions happen. I also want to thank our chief of police, Chief Magnus, in the city of Richmond, who was a voice for his community on the Community Correction Partnership, to let his partners on that panel know that communities are important, not just public safety. Communities create public safety. And so that's what I would say on some of the strategies that the Safe Return team is encouraged about in our county.
And then the Safe Return team made very important alliances with the immigration community around preserving family and community and uniting the community in Contra Costa to stop that jail, and that coalition still exists and is strengthened and continuing. Okay, Tamisha, now we're going to identify some specific problems faced by women affected by the criminal justice system and some proposed solutions. And we will be building on what the previous panel spoke about, specifically Professor Bloom.
First of all, I want to say I'm not an expert on this issue except for being a formerly incarcerated woman. And I want to definitely thank Bishop Edwina Santiago, who has definitely been keeping women at the forefront of realignment and reentry in Contra Costa County. And, you know, across this nation, she has been doing great work in our community to address any issues for women. And I just want to say that Barbara Bloom pretty much covered it. A lot of people talked about what needs to happen as it relates to formerly incarcerated women as a whole. What I do want to say is that prevention is important. What I didn't hear was juvenile facilities being addressed, and the fact that we have a lot of teenage mothers who are incarcerated in our juvenile facilities, who have no programs to assist them, parenting classes, behavioral classes, stuff that they need. Young ladies are definitely suffering. They are not seeing their children while they're incarcerated in these juvenile facilities. I think we need to show them more, the same type of support that we show for adult women while incarcerated and while returning back home to our communities. The other thing that I want to say as it relates to family is that I think the whole family needs to be supported. These women leave behind families, not just children's, but husbands, significant others, parents, brothers and sisters, where the whole family system needs to be supported while individuals are incarcerated, but also returning home and having to deal with whatever we have been through while were incarcerated. I definitely know that I think preserving a mother's connection to her children while incarcerated is definitely important. I know that programs for formerly incarcerated children, children of formerly incarcerated men and women need more programs to be able to assist them while their parents are incarcerated. When I came home, my son definitely let me know that he was locked up while I was locked up. And, that's definitely important. I think the only thing that kept me going was network, the grace of God, and the drive to really want to be a good mother to my sons. So I think, just to sum it up is that for me, women definitely need to be focused on, appreciated, and that we should know that without healthy women in our communities are bound to fail.
And in the spirit of that continuing health, I just wanted to add that one of the things that county officials really need to address and certainly state elected officials can pressure them and provide some leadership in this direction, is improved medical health and mental health care inside the county jails. We know that many of the county jails do not have women's health services available. There is no gynecologist in many, many county jails. Another aspect that needs to be improved in terms of conditions at that level is contact visiting. We talk about keeping families unified. There's no way to do that if young children are denied physical affection from their parents, and especially their mothers. And the same is true in the reverse. The health of a mother is very dependent on being able to maintain that connection with her children and her family while she's inside, and we need contact visiting to do that. Most county jails do not have contact visiting. That needs to be addressed. Also, support groups for battered women. Many women coming back from prison go back into relationships that are abusive because they have no alternatives. There's no safe housing. There aren't enough programs like New Perspectives that actually provide residential and transitional housing for mothers and their kids. So that is another element that needs to be addressed and included in our solutions. Thank you.
And then I'd like to introduce the rest of the panel. On my right, next to Tamisha, I have Wendy Still, Chief of Probation, San Francisco County, and she'll be discussing public safety realignment in San Francisco. Right next to me, I have Adam Christensen, Sheriff Coroner, Stanislaus County. He'll discuss Sheriff's Custody and Community Institute of Life Skills and how it helps change lives. To the left of Assemblymember Skinner, I have Carlos Morales, County Behavioral Health Services, San Mateo County, discussing getting ready, coming home, staying home. And then finally, my good friend Ron Davis, Chief of Police, East Palo Alto, who's had a very successful community policing program, reducing crime in East Palo Alto, and has also run a state-funded reentry program, the only police department that is doing that in the state. So I'd like to have Wendy Still kick this off.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Senator Hancock and Assembly Members Quirk and Skinner, for having me here today. Can you hear her? Can you hear me okay? Okay, is this better?
Yes.
All right. San Francisco started our realignment and our reentry strategies really back in 2008, which was 3 years before realignment ever hit, and that was when we created a reentry council. And the reentry council consists of not only the criminal justice partners that you would imagine, but also our social service agencies, and in addition to that, formerly incarcerated individuals. So we had the voice at the table who we were trying to help, right? Which is extremely important. Having a strong, effective collaboration is important for two reasons. One is you want to leverage the resources of all those agencies. You don't want to duplicate. You don't want to act in a stovepipe. And you want to create citywide or countywide values and have everybody working towards that common goal. And our work began in 2008, but really it coalesced, I think, in 2010 with the event of SB 678, which was evidence-based probation supervision. And I came from the prison system. I worked in the prison system for over 26 years, and also for the federal prison receiver. I had 10 prisons, 40,000 inmates, men and women. I reformed the women's prison and community mother-infant program, those systems. And so I had a lot of experience of working with the individuals that we were trying to figure out how to help effectively. So I walked into San Francisco with that knowledge prior to ever having a thought of evidence-based probation supervision or realignment ever hitting. But because I had that background and knowledge of what didn't work also, because I learned that as much as I learned what did work in the prison system. So fast forwarding to 2010, we implemented a system that was risk-based. We used a risk and needs instrument so that we identified the individual treatment need of every individual, what their criminogenic needs. It's like going to a doctor, right? To be successful or have an effective course of treatment, you have to have an evaluation and then a course of treatment that follows that. So basically, we implemented the use of a risk and needs instrument and also brought up the service capacity. We were very successful. We reduced our recidivism, our failures to state prison probation, which is what 678 was all about. We received $2.1 million, and every penny of that money has been invested in service capacity, because for individuals to be successful, it's great if you know what their needs are, but if you don't have the services to be able to match what their needs, you're still not going to have successful efforts. And so with that, we strongly work with our Department of Public Health, invested heavily in services such as substance abuse treatment. We partnered with Five Keys Charter School and leveraged their ability to pay for school. We have a school inside the jail. The individuals can receive their GED, their high school diploma. We also have that same service available in probation, my office, and in our new one-stop community assessment center, which was spoken to. We've brought all the services in a one-stop center so that the individuals do not have to try and navigate the city agencies to get housing, to get education services, to attend a cognitive behavioral therapy program. We've trained all of our officers in over 200 hours of how to work with clients. We've changed our language. We've changed our policies. We work really closely. We have a massive collaborative court system. We have a domestic violence court, a mental health court, a veterans court, a geographic area court where we had a lot of crime. But our model also is based on the premise of we want to break that intergenerational cycle of incarceration. So we've created a family-focused, trauma-informed, gender-responsive service model. And we do, as Professor Ball was talking about earlier, we do a risk and needs assessment on everyone before we do a pre-sentence report. That information, we're one of 3 counties that with administrative office of the court, we have evidence-based sentencing also, and we've integrated the criminogenic risk and need and recommendations to the court. So the plan starts really at the time we do that assessment and we ask the court for treatment. And they've been very supportive of that. Our district attorney, our public defender, our sheriff's department, child support, removing those child support barriers for individuals to get their driver's license, to get basically reconnected with their family. It's really important that there's a realistic child support plan, and part of that plan may be zero until we can get them skills and employed. We also have created a sentencing commission. We think absolutely change, if we're going to change our criminal justice system, a really important part of that is a sentencing commission at the statewide level. But being that hasn't happened yet, we've created one locally. And we've looked at things like low risk. We've separated out. And as Professor said, you don't want to focus your energy because you're going to make your low risk worse by basically intervening a lot with them. You focus your energy and your resources on your moderate and your high risk. And what the research tells us is 18 months of supervision plus 200 hours of treatment related to what that individual needs for moderate risk, you're going to have your best reduction in recidivism. Your high risk, it's 300 hours. But we've looked at now our supervision length, and this is really important because for us, if our individuals were going to fail, they were going to fail within 24 months. So why are we having 3 years plus supervision sentences, right? Our job should be create that effective program within that. And fast forwarding to what our results are is we have an 88% successful completion of probation. We've reduced our probation failures to state prison by 40%. And so I guess out of time here, my message is the partners have to work closely, the public and private partners, and the resources have to be directed to the capacity and given to those community-based organizations, as well as shared with the public partners, creating alternative sentencing programs. We are creating a program specifically for women that they won't be incarcerated. It's intensive supervision alternative. Our DA, public defenders, they have alternative sentence planners. In essence, we've looked at every every element of our system, and we've infused it with research-based practices, and it's producing results. We have the lowest incarceration rate per capita, the second in the entire United States. Thank you.
Senator, I'm not sure I can follow that presentation. Yeah, Wendy just stole pretty much all of my thunder. So, good morning, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Sheriff Adam Christensen. I'm the sheriff from Stanislaus County, and I too want to thank Senator Hancock and Assemblymember Quirk for hosting this today. I've participated in a panel discussion previously with Senator Hancock, and I think the thing we all recognize and agree upon is that this thing called realignment is really a paradigm shift in public safety and corrections and community safety in California. It's not something that we've ever done before, and I think that by bringing people together and having a respectful dialogue about the challenges and some of the things we face and how do we make it work is really beneficial to everyone, because we all live in a world that is very diverse, whether it's our value and belief systems, whether it's cultural diversity. As we've heard earlier in some of the presentations, we know that the round peg doesn't necessarily fit in the square hole. And we have to be willing to be flexible and look at different ideas, look at what works, what doesn't work, and really recognize that there are programs, evidence-based programs we know are successful, and really benchmark statewide what people are doing. So Wendy, as I mentioned, just wiped out all of my talking points, but so this is going to be a refresher course. In Stanislaus County, and frankly, ladies and gentlemen, I will offer up and throw myself under the bus that I was probably one of the biggest vocal critics against realignment. I testified as an intervener. I was concerned about quality of life issues. I was concerned about the safety impacts. I was concerned about adequate, sustainable funding and some of the challenges that we knew would go along with this. But as time passed and we found that we were able to strengthen our partnerships and really develop and go beyond what we were already doing with early intervention and prevention, there's almost a hope that, and I've got 5 minutes, there's almost a hope that, we want this to be successful. And I truly believe that our success is based on a number of different variables, but it does really boil down to partnerships, relationships, and collaboration, because everybody's value and belief system is different. Everybody's, cultural values are different. We talk about traditional family values and how important it is to have good role models and mentors at home. We talk about early intervention and prevention and everything we're doing with young people to divert them away from a life of gangs and methamphetamine, because we don't want them in the criminal justice system in the first place. And so that in itself, I think, is a basis of where sheriffs statewide already had a solid foundation of working with community-based organizations to provide educational, vocational, and rehabilitative opportunities. Realignment just made us take a second look at it and double our efforts. And so we take service, civic, charitable, faith-based business, education, agriculture, a whole host of community-based organizations that are listed on page 49 in a press release I did about one of our programs that really do provide those services. The services Tamisha talked about what are we doing up front with risk assessment, with assessment in general, making sure that we're providing and referring people to appropriate services they need to be successful. I spoke with Carlos just before we started the panel discussion, and he's a veteran. He served our country. Yet prior to the current administration at the sheriff's office, we didn't specifically screen in our correctional facility for veterans. And now we do, and we make sure that they get the services that they need or those services that are available to them. Throughout the discussion this morning, it's fascinating to listen to the different perspectives and the different ideas. And I think that, again, we capitalize on those and we take the best of the best and we take those back to our communities, and we continue our efforts to reduce recidivism, to break cycles of addiction and violence. Now, we do that a number of different ways. We have a family justice center in Stanislaus County that brings all of these services together under one roof so that it makes it easier for people to get the services they need, specifically women who have been exploited, victims of domestic violence, and we embed in those partnerships not only the community-based organizations but law enforcement. Law enforcement knows that it's very, very difficult to build trust in the community. Even today, there are those of you in the audience that don't trust me. I walked by a number of you this morning and said good morning, and there was a few that didn't even recognize me. So we all have personal prejudices and biases based on what we believe and how we've been raised. And I think we need to set those aside, and these types of forums and discussions allow us to do that and have that respectful dialogue. You know, at the end of the day, I think our goal is the same, and that's to help people. We live in a country that prides itself on human rights and civil rights. Is incarceration the answer? Perhaps in some cases. Most often, the better we can do at diverting people away from the criminal justice system or helping them make better choices, that's where we need to go. If you look, thank you. If you look at page 49 in your handout, that's really the press release. It speaks for itself. It's a program that was developed in partnership with we specifically hired a programs director. I've got 1 minute left. He's a chaplain. I can't say enough about the support from the faith-based community that helps us, but the purpose of the program, the goals and objectives in the program are listed in that press release. Read it. But one of the elements that Tamisha mentioned was bringing people back to help. Listening really is, I think, the key. And in these programs, I join these folks. I join these men and women, and I ask them point blank, what's worked for you? What doesn't work for you? How can we help you? And we tailor that to the needs of those individuals, so we make sure that the resources match up with the people who need help. So bringing our successful graduates back as mentors for the next class is also critical and key to our success. So I'm not going to go over my time. I know how valuable everybody's time is. Again, I appreciate the opportunity to come and share with you just my perspective on where we're at and where I think we need to go. And the one thing I will say, and I'll leave you with this, so far this morning, and perhaps I've missed it, but let's not forget it, is I've not heard a tremendous amount of dialogue with respect to personal accountability or victim recognition. Let's remember that we still have another group, another demographic out there, and those are our victims, and they need our help too. Thank you very much.
Next, Carlos Morales.
Hello, I'm Carlos Morales, Clinical Service Manager with San Mateo County. I think you can hear me well. Well, I'm going to be talking about San Mateo's response to realignment. It's been really to focus on evidence-based practices.
Can everybody hear him? No.
I'm sorry.
Yeah.
And use a combination of county and contracted services. Probation obviously is our lead agency. We have a Human Service Agency and a Health Department. Service Connect is the name of this collaboration, and it's a three-phase model. We, like San Francisco, were very fortunate to have gotten a SAMHSA grant. Well, we had a planning process and got a SAMHSA grant for jail reentry, and that was in December of '09. So we really had some structure and some ways of integrating some of the things that they had done into Service Connect. And the first phase, the getting ready phase, we get advance notice and pre-release planning. And that's really critical for us. We have a correctional health provider inside the facility who does assessments for us, mental health, AOD, physical health needs, and social services. And that information is emailed to us 30 days prior to release. It also includes a short-term transition plan with goals for the first 8 hours out, the first 24 hours out, and the first week. Then we have someone from Service Connect come in at least twice within that 30-day window to meet with the participant of the program and to follow them when they come out. We also attend a Sheriff's Department multidisciplinary team meeting where we go over all the folks that are coming out and discuss the reentry cases, and we track them that way. during that transition from the getting ready phase to the coming home phase, we do a warm handoff. And I think this is an essential feature of our model, where ideally, and it usually happens this way, that the same people that had visited are waiting for you when you come out. And we walk them over to probation, kind of demystify that process. It does two things, really. It helps them to understand when their next report date is and that kind of a thing. And it also avoids getting that first warrant, because we know that there's a subset of people that never show up once they leave the facility. Also in the coming home phase, we have people come down to Service Connect, and that's really kind of a accessibility to services and a respectful model. And you have to kind of engineer that respect in. We also, from Behavioral Health and Recovery Services, have a welcoming policy. And we wanted to create a respectful environment. And how we did that is essentially we have an ethnically diverse staff with folks who were formerly incarcerated that are represented in that. And our treatment providers are co-occurring capable and trauma-informed. We also have emergency services that we can give right off the bat, food, shelter, clothing, and we can get a person a job as they walk in that day, which I think is essential. We have psychiatry on site. We have a psychiatrist that will follow somebody until we can hook them up to another program or keep them on her caseload. And we've worked out how to do the labs and all that kind of a thing. Probation provides us with a case, and that's their kind of evidence-based assessment intervention system. And we try to match out our treatment pathways with those categories. We also have Telecare, who does our full-service partnership for severely mentally ill folks, and they have a 24/7, 1-to-10 ratio staffing, and they provide housing for people, which really works with that population. And we also attend a biweekly MDT, a multidisciplinary team, with probation to give them updates about who we're placing in programs and their location. They also tell us if there's been any warrants issued, or if they're about to issue a warrant, or if somebody's been flash incarcerated, or if they've got a positive UA. Because those are great intervention points for us to get in for the flash incarceration, or when someone has a positive UA. The staying home part, that's kind of really the bulk of it, and we do a lot of case management. And when people do transitions between programs, it's very important that we support that, either a transition to a higher or lower level care. And I'll just briefly end with a story of when we first started this, we went up to Vacaville to meet with a participant of the program. And we spent it took us about a couple hours to get up there. It took us about 40 minutes, and we spent probably 20 minutes with this individual. And he first thought we were coming to put him in a mentally disordered offender category. So he was very suspicious of who we were and what we were doing there. And essentially, when we left, we were thinking, gosh, is he going to show up or not, And this guy had spent most of his life, adult life, incarcerated. And he got out, and he made his way. It was on a weekend. We weren't open. But he came back, and he really had a difficult time transitioning back to the community. Really traumatized individual. Would not accept housing from us. And actually, for roughly 3 to 4 months, he was he was homeless. And we'd have to do outreaches to him. And eventually, he accepted some housing, and he completed probation. And I saw him probably 2 weeks ago. And what a transformation. I mean, this person, I didn't recognize him. He put on weight. He looked more healthy than he had ever looked. And he's actually got an apartment that he got with his girlfriend on his own, and he's still connected to services. And that's the other thing I wanted to kind of say from the behavioral health and recovery perspective. It's not just getting off probation. It's about the rest of your life. And some folks are going to need services periodically, and we should be there to provide those. And it shouldn't be that they have to start over again or they have to get back to custody to get services. We should make certain that they get the right service with the right providers and follow that up. And if they need to come back to us, the people that they know or that they've worked with, they should be able to do that. And we should have space for that in our provision of service. So thank you.
And next is East Palo Alto Police Chief Ron Davis.
Good morning. Okay, you didn't talk to the sheriff. Now you just good morning. The sheriff, I apologize. I meant to talk to you, man.
No worries.
Yeah. So at the introduction, the assembly member mentioned that East Palo Alto is the only city or only police department in the state that has a reentry program, or that is actually funding one, and for a while ran a Department of Corrections funded reentry program. And I'm just going to give you a backdrop of that. I've been in East Palo Alto for 8 years, and I see a lot of my family members here from the city. Before I spent 8 years in East Palo Alto, I spent 20 years in Oakland, on the Oakland Police Department as well. Very similar communities, East Palo Alto, Oakland, Richmond, probably some of your counties, Stockton, Modesto. Very great, diverse communities, but with some very significant challenges that we all face. So I got sworn in June of 2005, and if anybody's ever had a job of police chief, so a lot of people want to talk to you. And so I remember getting sworn in. Anyone know David Lewis? The late, great David Lewis? So someone said, well, look, this guy David Lewis wants to meet with you. And I'm like, well, who is he? And he says, well, he's an advocate on reentry and informally incarcerated. I said, look, get his brother about 5 minutes, come in and tell me I got another meeting, and I'll get him out. Because reentry at that point in my life had been, my job was to reenter you back into prison. Very simple. A very, very easy formula. So David came in, and I'm thinking, okay, I'm going to give him the 5 minute, and my assistant's going to come in and give me the signal. There's some meeting to go to. And if anybody knows David, you know that didn't work. So about 30 days later, I'm riding with David up to San Quentin, and I had to look at him. I go, brother, how did you do this? Why am I driving to San Quentin with you to go see inmates inside of a prison? And he taught me a big lesson, quite frankly. And the lesson was that they were not inmates, they were our residents. And no matter what has happened, 98% of them are coming back home. And so the question then has to be, how do you welcome them back home? So because of that interaction with David, his leadership, it started changing my view about the role of law enforcement. 6 months passes, and I have a police officer that's shot and killed by a parolee out of prison about 6 months. Now, as a community, as a police department, I have a choice. I could easily, quite frankly, and you've seen it, declare war on parolees. You just shot and killed one of my officers. And I can do the lockdown for the next 30, 60, 90 days and put as many as possible into prison. Or we can answer the question, what would make someone 6 months out of prison want to engage, carry a gun to the point that he's now shooting and killing a police officer? So we chose the latter. We worked with our assembly member, Ira Ruskin. We worked with, and this was the key, the family of the slain officer who had the same exact question, why? And we ended up getting legislation passed to create a pilot program in East Palo Alto to where we're now running a reentry program. What that program taught me over the next 3.5 years when it was funded is that redemption has to be a core value of any community. Redemption has to be a core value, especially a core value of the police department. So then what I now am examining is what is the role then of local police departments in reentry? And too often the conversation is surrounding counties. And I think our county sheriffs, our probation chiefs, the progressive ones you heard today, San Mateo County is outstanding with regards to that, do a tremendous job. But people don't get released to county entities, they get released to communities. And whether it's in the neighborhood of East Palo Alto, East Oakland, whether it's in North Richmond, it doesn't make a difference. They're in somebody's community. So how do we then welcome them back so that there's a way to do that? What we've done with East Palo Alto is we now operate what we call a day reporting center. It's run by Mr. Hoover, who's standing right there. He's one of the strong leaders in our community. And you can tell by the way I said Mr., right, instead of Robert Hoover. So, and we right now are serving about 70-plus participants, residents that are coming back from jails and prisons. And some of them have been out for a while. They would not even meet the criteria of parole or probation, but they're still formally incarcerated. They still need services. And at this coalition, at this day reporting center, is Mr. Hoover has connected them to at least 10, 12, 15 community-based, faith-based service providers. It's a one-stop shop for people to get assistance. Now, the key is this is being funded and operated by the police department, because I think what is also very important is that the role of the police officer must change, is we must become partners with the community, and I think sometimes the only way to change that culture is to put your money where your mouth is. And so instead of funding additional officers, I'm funding a reentry center. I have sent 10, 15 officers up to San Quentin. We have a partnership with No More Tears. There's a great group up at San Quentin that is doing a lot of anti-violence work. And they've provided training from officers so that the officers can understand the culture of prison and why it may be hard, what are the obstacles of reentry, and learn more and more. The whole idea for me is a basic philosophy for policing, that the greatest deterrent of crime and violence in our communities is not a neighborhood saturated with cops, it's a neighborhood alive with residents. And the only way that neighborhood can be alive is if we restore families. And so to have this mass incarceration of young men, and primarily young men of color, is crazy. And we have to cease it immediately. It has to stop. We have to find alternatives so that we can actually reduce crime. For me, reentry strategy is one of my core public safety crime reduction strategies. To reduce recidivism from 70 to 14% is reducing people going into prison. To what the sheriff said is reducing victimization. It's increasing trust and confidence in the police department. It's less expensive. And there's a humanity part of it is that we should be trying to help, not destroy. So I think what happens is we leave here, start asking your police chiefs what role they play in reentry. And it has to be more than just technical violations and the enforcement. It has to be part of the treatment. We must be part of the treatment, part of the solutions, if this is really going to make a difference. And so I'm very grateful for the leadership of the senator and assemblyperson for setting this up. I think there's a lot of discussions to be had. I think the more we engage in this, we will realize that it will be a better outcome. I really applaud the leadership nationally, making Smart on Crime really focus on reentry as well, evidence-based practices, and I think that's where we need to go. So thank you.
Well, that was great. One of the great things is hearing the details, isn't it? Like, how did you really do that? And hopefully we will get some more of that with the next panel. We'll go right into the next panel. So I think, with great thanks to all of you, you were terrific. And if people do want to fill out a question card for any of these panelists, do so. And if we have time at the end, before we break for lunch, we'll take some questions. Okay. Okay, everybody. Welcome. If everybody would take their seats, we're going to start the third panel. All right, thank you all for hanging in here. This is content-heavy morning, but I do want to recognize some of the official people that are here today. Supervisor Keith Carson from Alameda County is here. Our city auditor, Courtney Ruby, is here. And our Alameda County probation chief, LaDonna Harris, was here, I think. And El Cerrito Police Chief, Sylvia Moore, and the Alameda County Public Defender, Brendan Woods. It's really important. All these people are important collaborators in the work that moves forward. There are representatives from a variety of other offices. Contra Costa Supervisor, Federal Glover, Santa Cruz Supervisor, John Leopold, Senator Ellen Corbett, Assemblywoman Joan Buchanan, Supervisor Scott Hegarty, San Mateo Supervisor Warren Slocum, Senator Mark DeSaulnier, Assemblyman Bob Wykowski, Supervisor Alameda County Supervisor Nate Miley, DA Nancy O'Malley in Alameda County, Contra Costa Supervisor John Joya, Supervisor Wilma Chan, and Supervisor Richard Valle, both of Alameda County, and City Council and of City Council Member Lynette McElhenney's office in the city of Oakland. We thank you all for being here too, because you're the people we need to move forward with in creating public policies that support some of these best practices. As we kick off the third panel about working together to create comprehensive systems, we're going to, again, have Linda Evans facilitate a conversation with two formerly incarcerated people, Michael Hamilton, who graduated from prison and started a successful small business, and Gary Scott, the founder of the Kid Cat program in San Quentin Prison. It's a program I just visited about 3 weeks ago of men who were sentenced to adult prison when they were juveniles. And it's a really quite extraordinary program developing a very interesting curriculum. So Linda, facilitate the panel.
Before our third panel starts, I just want to encourage all of the elected officials and advocates in the audience to really look at this morning as an opportunity to learn and to use the information that you get here and the perspectives, the different perspectives, to act courageously and with innovation and creativity as you pursue policy recommendations that have been mentioned today. It takes courage to make change, and we need our elected officials to be courageous. Community organizations play an important role in supporting people who have been incarcerated when they come home. Michael and Gary will highlight what the impact of those community organizations has been, some of the challenges that they have faced, and how they're adjusting. Michael, Gary, please say a little bit about yourself and share your reflections on the role of communities and organizations in helping support people come home, whether your needs are being met, and how the gaps can be addressed.
Hi, my name is Mike Hamilton. Can everybody hear me? Okay. Thank you again for allowing this platform, this forum. It feels good. It really does. The first panel spoke a lot about data. Second panel about action. And I think Gary and I are a result of both. But for me, more about the action, because in my life it made a difference. Understanding what I've done to myself, to my family, and to the community as a whole, negatively, how I've impacted them, had a lot to do with my progression as a human being, whether incarcerated or not. And so the more programming we have, the more understanding we have of how our actions affect others and ourselves, we can come to those conclusions at an earlier stage, either preventing violent crimes or while any individual is incarcerated. So again, I want to emphasize how important that is for us to have programming, for us to have mentoring programs for people that once they learn this information, once they really hold on to what they've learned, there's an opportunity to give it back. I can't emphasize how important that was to me in being here on this platform today to really recognize all that I have done and then to help others and to prevent this from happening in maybe somebody else's family. So I committed a second-degree homicide in 1979. I was incarcerated for 30 years. I started out in San Quentin when it wasn't so a prestigious a place. Not many programs existed. In fact, when I left San Quentin in 1986, there were only, I believe, 49 people on the main line. And the main line, again, is kind of a term philosophy that defines us. And there was a lot of data mentioned in this room earlier about how that information may or may not impact each individual. as they're going through the process of incarceration and completing their incarceration and getting ready to reenter society. So within that process, I've watched, due to the change of philosophy when I came to prison in 1980, there was 12 prisons, for example, and I believe there's 33 today, not including the women's prisons. And so that philosophy has, of course, induced a lot of behavioral issues with, of course, a lot of hatred, a lot of violence, and a lot of victims along the way. And so at some point, within my incarceration, after I think my 8th parole hearing, you know, I had an epiphany, an awakening, and I thought, you know, everything that I'm doing in my life is to gain my freedom, you know, and the epiphany was that I could have freedom today, you know. So it didn't matter at that point where the parole board or the community or the state was in my life. I had to be free, and so I made a decision to change my life. And even though the programs had been declined us after you know, this massive change of, actually it's an addiction to building more prisons. And the philosophy, if anybody has been through an addiction or understands it, understands that the state needs to go to rehab. That's the reality. So, you know, and within rehab, what is there? There's denial, there's isolation, there's silence, there's everything that deals with incarceration is all about addiction. So, you know, we need to change the philosophy. We need to change what Eddie said so eloquently earlier. We need to really focus on emphasizing pre-release as you get incarcerated, not 30 days before you're released. You have to go through a systematic change, you know, and to have 2 sheriffs up on this panel speaking about that, it really enlightens my soul, you know, because for so long, that didn't happen. Like he said, you know, I want to put you in prison, not keep you from prison. And that's what I felt every day of my life. And so to be up on this panel and, you know, to hear people say that physically and have action behind it, my soul is enlightened. And I just want to end with this. My time's up. Again, thank you for everybody for allowing this platform. And, you know, I was asked recently, why are you there? And the reason we're all here is that we've earned it. We've earned this right. And so as long as we can decide that we can build leaders no matter where they're at in life, you know, we can change that philosophy of, you know, incarcerating people and throwing away the key and really giving them some meat and potatoes to hang on to and build their life and leading communities. So thank you for this opportunity.
Good morning / afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Gary Scott. I'm a co-founder of Kit Kat, and Senator Hancock talked about Kit Kat as well. With that being said, Kit Kat is a group that really desires to give back to the community and also to help the kids out. We were all committed great harm when we were young, and we just really, really want to give back, and that's part of our healing process. So this group is expanding and growing, and I'm so appreciative to join those men up in there and work towards something special. And I remember when we first started meeting on the inside, we were sitting down with pens and papers and just wishing and dreaming, but those dreams became a reality in that we started this group and we grew to the point to where we offered our services to people such as Senator Hancock and other youth supporters that through them, and I would like to thank them for their help in passing SB 260, which gives youth offenders a meaningful opportunity for parole. So I want to thank everybody for that. And one of the things that we like to do when we celebrate, we all made nachos. And the guys, I found out the guys made nachos, and I went and got me some nachos on the outside, so it was cool. But I want to say, as far as reentry as pertaining to me, and my beliefs is that reentry starts on the inside. And for me, reentry started when I took responsibility for my actions, for the harm that I caused to my family, to the community, and to the, I had to use this term right now, the victim's family, but we like to say survivors or thrivers, you know, the 4 words of empowerment. At the time I made that decision to live a life of accountability, a lot of progress have been made in my life. And I would like to say, I wanted to acknowledge one of the special groups that is inside San Quentin and that is currently expanding, the Inside Prison Project, which has a group there called Victims Offenders Education Group. That group there was like, it changed my way of thinking. And since I believe reentry starts with my thinking, the way I looked at things, it was very helpful, because if I would have got out with the same core beliefs that I had when I was incarcerated, I couldn't make it out here. And one of the things that Vogue does, it helped me as well as others in there to connect the dots of our lives. How did I get to a point where I can commit the worst crime that I can ever commit against another human being? And just to follow that, I was incarcerated for 2nd-degree murder. I did 15 years, and I'm 4 months out now. And thank you. And it helped me get to know myself, get to know my patterns, my cycle, like the cycle of offense, and help me get to a point to where I can break that cycle. And the biggest thing I learned while in San Quentin, and one of the things I can tell you that I've learned with this word called empathy. Through the Vogue program, we was allowed to do such exercises to where we wrote on the board everybody that we harmed. And we was doing that exercise, I looked around and I said, and I saw the family, the community, the garbage man, the dog, the everything, the list just went on and on. And it helped me realize, like, wow, I did that to the community, that ripple effect. And at the end of the Vogue program, we have the surrogate panel of people who have been harmed in like manners as their crimes. And we got to share all of our stories and listen to the people who are harmed, who have lost their loved ones, resonated with me. And I became very emotional. And seeing that harm, it made me think that I can never, ever treat another human being that way again. So that word, empathy, is a beautiful word, and I can take that with me forever. So, and also I wanted to acknowledge the Options Recovery Services, who I am now with. They help guys in their transition back out, in that they provide housing, substance abuse counseling, and help us with our criminal addictive thinking. So just transitioning back out here and into a program like that has been very helpful for me to continue to live in the Bay Area and not having to go back to Los Angeles in my old gang-infested community. So I like to thank Options for that as well. One of the things that I've went through, I only know I have 1 minute left, 30 seconds left now, thank you. I went through a point of disappointment in that the first job application that I picked up, I looked at it, I knew that I was gonna have to say that I was a felon. I didn't know that I would have to explain what I went in for. And I became like, wow, that was hard for me. And then I looked at the part of it where it talks about references and previous jobs and stuff. I never had a job on the outside before, so I became more disappointed in myself. But having a support system where I can talk to people and get that out to help me overcome this self-defeating thinking, that was really helpful. And my time is up, so thank you.
So feel free to ask questions, fill out the question cards as people talk. The third, our final panel this morning is going to be Meredith Desatel from the Committee for Civil Rights of the San Francisco Bay Area, the Reentry Coordinator and Staff Attorney, Rebecca Brown from Further the Work, the Reentry Solutions Group, Pastor Andre Harris, who's a community mentor and community worker in the San Mateo County Criminal Justice Realignment Program, Service Connect, that Carlos talked about on the last panel, and then Javier Aguirre, Director of Reentry Services in Santa Clara County. Thank you all very much for being here. Meredith?
Yes. Okay.
Hi, everyone. My name is Meredith Desatel. I'm a staff attorney at the Lawyers Committee for Civil Rights. I'm very happy to be here and want to thank Senator Hancock and Assembly Members Quirk and Skinner for this great opportunity. I direct our Second Chance Legal Clinic. We provide free legal services to people with prior arrests or convictions to help support successful reentry. I also work on several initiatives and campaigns to challenge the systemic barriers that prevent people from achieving true reintegration and reaching their potential to not just survive, but to thrive in their communities. I have a somewhat difficult job of going through what we see at our clinic as the legal barriers to reentry. It's kind of a long list of serious challenges that our clients are facing, but I hope to end on some of the campaigns and initiatives that my organization and other great organizations are working on to address these issues on a system level. So at our Second Chance Clinic, we deal with the legal issues that flow directly from having had prior contact with the criminal justice system. And the very first thing that folks come to see us about is employment. And you've heard about it today, the challenges of having to face that box on the initial job application. It's discouraging to the applicant, and it usually means that when you check that box, your application doesn't get past go, right? Especially where job applications are online these days, there's not even a chance to write in, you'd like to talk about it in the interview or whatever it is, you can't get past that screen until you check the box, yes or no. And aside from that, there are a lot of laws that disqualify people who have certain types of convictions from having certain types of jobs, and we see this most clearly in the category of occupational licensing. So this is the kinds of jobs where you need permission from the state, and it's things like lawyers, doctors, it's things like cosmetology, it's healthcare, it's security, and these are areas where it's very hard to know up front if you're going to be able to get that license. And what we're seeing is a lot of people who have records, they get denied up front, and their best chance is an appeal process, which is daunting, if not impossible. Having a lawyer gives you a much better shot. But we know how hard that is. That's why our clinic exists. And the other complication is it's expensive to appeal these licenses. So I want to apply to be a security guard. I get denied, and I'm going through the appeal. I have to get certified court records from my cases. Those are $25 a page. We just met with a client who was $200 into his appeal, and he still doesn't even know what his chances are of getting his license. So having that money barrier is huge. And then employers often don't realize that there are actually restrictions on what they're allowed to ask or consider, including under state and federal law. On the housing side, we see a lot of the same issues, including that box on the initial application. There are also a lot of misconceptions related to housing. For example, a lot of folks will say, oh, if you have a felony, you can't live in public housing, which is not true. The law doesn't keep you out. It's usually a local practice of a local housing authority that might, not as a matter of law, but just practice, keep people out. And that's something that we can challenge and change as a community. Across both employment and housing issues are some other things that come up, including what probably a lot of people in the room know about, that's clean slate. So people come to see us because they want to clean up their record, and that does help you become a better candidate for job and housing opportunities. But it's not the fix-all that a lot of people might think. I like to call it cleaner slate because you don't get your slate wiped clean. With very, very narrow exceptions, what you get is a new entry on your rap sheet that says your conviction has been dismissed. That's not taking it off. And there are some times where it's still going to come up, and we have clients who think, oh, I got my expungement, I'm cool. They don't disclose it when they have to, and then they're seen as lying when really it's a misunderstanding about what clean slate is. And also, not everyone is eligible for clean slate, depends on your conviction type and sentence type. And then here again, money comes up. If you owe any money on your case, that is a barrier to getting your clean slate. And you're in this position where the court says, yeah, you can have your expungement, but first you have to pay the money, but you need the expungement to get the job to pay the money, right? So it's this vicious cycle. We also see a lot of issues around background checks. So these are the companies that run the background check based on court records, and these background checks violate the law all the time. They report things they're not supposed to. They don't give you notice about what's supposed to be on there. They report things wrong. Felonies or misdemeanors are reported as felonies. And when a background check is wrong, the cat's out of the bag. The employer knows things they shouldn't know, and you've lost out on that job or that housing opportunity. Across the board, there are some fundamental issues about the fact that records these days, they last a lifetime. They don't expire. And in this digital age, they're more accessible and more prevalent than ever. People misunderstand their records. I just met with a client who described to her potential employer her record as more serious than it actually was because she didn't understand what had happened in her case, and she lost the job because of that. In addition to these legal issues flowing directly from the record, there's a lot of issues that come up that are complicated by having been involved in the criminal justice system. One very common example is my driver's license is suspended because I missed my traffic court date because I was in jail at the time, and I can never get my license back now because I'm in this escalating cycle of debt related to my driver's license. And I've heard time and again that a driver's license is critical to being able to get a job. But aside from specific legal issues, I do want to mention the general societal discrimination. A study by a Princeton sociologist found that having a prior record reduces a job callback by nearly 50%. And that is even more severe for African American applicants. We also see that background checks can be used differently depending on the race of the applicant, where a black applicant might have to do a background check when a white applicant doesn't. And this was documented in the housing context up in Seattle. And what that is really, it's showing that the criminal record screening is really a veil for outright race discrimination. This general discrimination and stereotyping against people with records is reflected in policies that function not just to keep people from meeting their basic needs, like jobs and housing, but from ever being considered equal and participating members of the community. For example, we have laws that disqualify people with felony convictions from ever serving on a jury. And then there's also our voting disenfranchisement laws. In 2012, our Secretary of State extended our state disenfranchisement to cover all people affected by realignment, which is some 85,000 people, mostly people of color. All of these barriers function to create a type of second-class citizenship, a new Jim Crow, in the words of Professor Michelle Alexander, and the harm is not only against the individuals, but their families and communities where they live, as they are deprived of stability, economic resources, and political power. So I could go on and on about these barriers, but I want to turn briefly to some of the efforts of my organization and many others to challenge the barriers. In addition to our individual services, we conduct Know Your Rights trainings and provide handouts like the one you'll find in your materials. We also try to outreach to what you might think of as unlikely allies, like the business community, to talk about what their stake is in reentry. We're embarking on some litigation. We have litigated over voting rights, and right now we're trying to preserve California's background check laws. And on a policy side, you've already heard about AB 218. Another bill that's sitting on the governor's desk is AB 651, which would give expungement opportunities to people sentenced under realignment. So I'm going to stop there. I'm out of time, but I just want to highlight the critical role that all stakeholders, especially local organizations and grassroots organizations, play in helping to advance the work to challenge these systemic barriers and to make those rights a reality on the ground. So thank you.
So good morning, good afternoon, everybody. Can you hear me? Yes, Rebecca Brown. Thank you again for the invitation to speak here today. I want to start off by claiming my identity. Sometimes we imagine that people who have records are the ones who are supposed to claim their identity and not the rest of us, and I want to claim mine as well. I'm president of Further the Work, which is a consulting firm based in Richmond. Our mission is to advance social justice in our communities by advancing sector capacities. I'm also director of the Reentry Solutions Group, which is a grassroots community engagement, education, and advocacy initiative focused on West Contra Costa County. I'll talk more about that. But just as importantly, I'm the daughter of a violent man who lived with alcoholism and depression. He died alone in a rooming house, alienated from all of us when I was a teenager. I'm also a survivor of childhood rape, and I've actually been inside as a victim surrogate in San Quentin. My journey on restorative justice and healing started through my work with IPP, and being in that room was an amazing experience for me. I'm the wife of an African-American man who's dual-diagnosed serious trauma survivor. He's been in and out of the system, and he's still struggling to find his feet. He's living in the county shelter. I'm the mother of black, brown, and white children who deserve a better world. And I was raised by an activist mother who made sure that I knew that Dr. King demanded, required, charged us all with the task of developing a beloved community. And that's my guiding philosophy. I want to talk today about the way, I want to use AB 109 as a way to illustrate the role of community organizing and fostering systems change. First, just a brief of what we've done together, and Tamisha was here, Safe Return Team Project was part of that, Senator Hancock was part of that, the assembly members have been part of that. We formed in late 2011, at the very dawn of AB 109, we formed an advisory committee called the Community Advisory Board, or CAB. It's the first one in the state. It's now formally recognized by our CCP bylaws. It's charged with representing community voice. Our strategic plan also called for the development of a position for our countywide reentry coordinator. And in July 2012, Jesse Warner became our countywide reentry coordinator. Late 2012, we successfully resisted a proposed expansion to the jail. The sheriff agreed to table that proposal. His budget had previously been $10 million out of the $19 million AB 109 request. We managed to negotiate that away. In late 2012, we created an AB 109 operations plan with the goal, this was a line that was developed by one of our deputy DAs. The overarching goal of our operations plan is to foster lifelong liberty for all. And then we successfully advocated for about $5 million. Instead of investing in the prison, we wanted to invest it in people. So about $5 million is being invested in the community in the forms of grants to CBOs, in the development of a pretrial services program, and in the creation of one-stop reentry centers in 3 regions across the county. Go Contra Costa. What it takes, I think broadly speaking, there are about 4 elements that are really essential, we've found, at least in our experience. First, you need really strong organizing and mobilizing, and Cisco and Safe Return were among the leaders in that. You need allies across all elements of the community. You need a strong supervisor like Supervisor Joya, senators, assembly people, people on the CCP, people in county agencies, people in the community. You need the creation of guiding structures, both governance and documents. We were fortunate we already had a countywide reentry strategic plan, so we could start operating inside that. We developed an AB 109 operations plan, and what do you know, it ends up shaping decisions and helping to decide where the money goes. And we've created this community advisory board. So those are structures. And then I think the place that I've been able to add value is through the Reentry Solutions Group, which is a common table to build relationships, trust, and relevant education. The most visible mechanism of RSG is it's a monthly open-to-all meeting held at Civic Center in Richmond. No barriers to entry. You do not have to be affiliated with a gall-darn thing in order to show up. We work very hard to make sure that it gathers people from all across our community. So we have CDCR, probation, parole, county agencies, elected officials, funders, people who just are hanging on the corner, people who just came home, victim survivors, family members like mine. So just a little bit about the history of RSG as a way to illustrate the role of a common table. The Reentry Solutions Group is a grassroots community engagement and education initiative. It was formed in July 2011 in a partnership with me and Bay Area Legal Aid Susan Kim. And it reflected both county and Richmond strategic planning processes that everybody recognized we needed a place to coordinate information and foster collective learning. We recognized that there was an urgent common denominator in our community, and particularly in Contra Costa County, that the cycle of violence, trauma, violence, incarceration, reentry, recidivism, no matter where you are in our community, I don't care who you are, is affecting you. People are going to come home. Do you want them to come home and support themselves and support their families, or you want them to come home and be hanging on the corner again? Frustration levels are high, coping skills are generally low. So they're going to come home, you're going to support them in your own self-interest, or you're going to have them affect you in ways you don't like so much. That was the first thing, to recognize the urgent common denominator. And the second is that we had a functional gap that I could help fill, which is that we didn't have a place for all of these entities that were working together, working independently, to come together, to develop collective voice, to learn new things, and to develop shared strategies and actions. So each meeting of the RSG has 3 purposes. We feed you. That's the first purpose. That's part of the relationship building, making people come in, sit down together. Lots of times I make people sit with people they ain't used to sitting to, and I do that on purpose. And that's been really productive. The second is we always provide public education on irrelevant issues. So we partner with all kinds of people, Employment Law Project, Bay Area Legal Aid, Rubicon, providers, the county. We've done public education on what it's like to contract with the county, what an RFP looks like, what's it for. So public education. And the third purpose is every meeting is to foster strategies and opportunities for action, either individual action or collective action. The tricky part for me is the posture that I have to hold as the director of the Reentry Solutions Group. On one hand, I have to create a neutral space, but I have a clear vision. I believe that we should have effective systems of care. I believe that we should have alternatives to incarceration. And I believe in what I call now the PTA, progressive policies, transparent practices, accountable outcomes. I believe that. So if I see an ineffective, non-transparent system of care, I'm going to call it out. The second thing that I have to hold on my posture is the values that I hold personally and that I think our community holds as well. We believe in restorative justice because this criminal justice ain't working at all. We believe in being inclusive, meaning that all parts of our community have to be part of the solution, and we all have to be part of the change. And the third is we have to accept complexity. It's complex. It took us 200 years to build this system of incarceration in America, and I know because I've studied the history, it's going to take us a little while to change it. The function of the common table I'll talk about for one more minute. So if I think of Reentry Solutions Group as the common table where you can come together, you can just learn. It acts as a glue to foster ongoing coordination, something like a backbone in the collective impact initiatives, if some of you are familiar with that. We have to communicate useful information, action opportunities, and highlight the context, the forest and the trees. If you look in your packet on page 65, there's a little version of a graphic we created to help remind people of what we're doing when we come together month after month. There's a larger story of collective action. You have to provide accessible, readily usable research and analysis. So we've done analysis and provided people with information about the legislative intent of AB 109. We've done budget analysis. Thank you, 30 seconds. And you have to provide technical assistance to support the development of what I call legacy structures, whether it's the Community Advisory Board or the operations plan. The hardest part is you have to keep walking that line between I'm asking you and me to change our systems. I don't like what we're doing. That doesn't mean you're a bad guy. I can argue with the sheriff. It don't mean I have a single professional disregard for the sheriff. It's just our system demands change. It also means I have to be willing to say that to our CBO communities as well. It ain't enough just to get the money and then stay on home. If you're going to get that money, you got to come back to the table and you got to learn to do things better and differently. Thank you.
All right, my time. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Well, I ought to be able to talk louder being a pastor, shouldn't I? Well, first of all, I want to thank Senator Hancock and Assemblyperson and Assembly Member Quirk, and acknowledge Assemblyperson Skinner that's here today, and also Nathan Rapp, who so graciously allowed me to sit on this panel. I'm formerly incarcerated. You know, I'm sitting up here, and today is my 21st wedding anniversary. So y'all need to clap. You need to clap. Yeah, you need, I don't see it. You need to clap for that. So I have a beautiful wife, and I'm blessed to have a woman that accepted me, that never was involved in the criminal justice system, and accepted an old guy like me, and been married to me for 21 wonderful years. So, being formerly incarcerated now, and Gary, I'm glad you used that word. I think it's a couple of words that we need to look at. And one of them is one that Gary used about empathy, and the other one is sympathy. Because when we are engaging with communities, whether it's a city government or a county government, you have to literally feel folk. You know, you can't just acknowledge that people are hurting, that people are ashamed, that people have been humiliated, that people have been affected, from families to the children, to the whole community. It has to be more than just acknowledging it and stroking it with something. You have to really feel what folk are going through. You have to feel the hurt and the pain. And it's more to than just getting some money, because the problem is folk is chasing the money. And we better talk it like it really is. It's just chasing the money. And so what's happening is that now counties, since the AB 109 happened, the realignment, then you see folk creating 501c3s that have never in their life worked with somebody that's formerly incarcerated. So that's why I say you have to look at these two words, empathizing and sympathizing. There has to be that we literally are in touch. And the best way I know to bring about this change, and here's where the challenge is within the city government and the counties, getting people involved, just getting people to the table, getting people to show up to the meeting. You'll have 3 or 4 groups meeting for a whole community, and they're not in touch with the community. So it's a huge challenge in that. And another thing, where damage can come when groups come together and you overload the front end with too many services. There's a thing where it's called responsivity. And that's why I say spending time with folk. You got to know what people need. Everybody don't need a drug program. Some folk just need to be talked to. And the talk has to happen while they're incarcerated. If we wait for people to come home, we lose them. I don't care what happens. You will literally lose them. You have to literally start embedding a different way of thinking, a different way of acting, a different way of doing while somebody's in. Now, when I got out of Pelican Bay State Prison in 1989, we didn't have anything set up. So I had to get it on my own. There wasn't nobody telling me about expungement or certificate of rehabilitation for somebody that's been in the prison. So the first job I got through a company that I thought was literally going to hold on to me because they were a drug testing company, and they worked with my homeboy, David Lewis, who was running a reentry, a drug program, Free at Last. I said, they're going to keep me. They FedExed me my check. Ain't that something? So they fired me. So what happens is that we don't have groups that are the voice. I mean, literally being the voice, more than sitting at the table like this. Now, it's 2013, and we're still at the table, about to go into 2014. And we're still talking about stuff that should be remedied already. But here we go again. You have all these groups that are showing up just looking to enhance their budgets. And so that's the damage that it's caused when groups are coming together. And then again, too, the involvement with communities. Okay, I got 5 minutes. I can handle it. This is a sermonette. I can handle it. I can handle it. I can handle it. I can handle it. I'm going to have a minute left. Come on, y'all. When folk are coming together, just getting communities engaged and involved. I'm from East Palo Alto, born and raised, all my life. Went to jail, went to the pen, did everything there. Now I'm giving back. My church is over 800 members, 80% formerly incarcerated. Y'all hear what I just said? Now I work at Service Connect. Now I work with Carlos Morales, who was up here. I work at Service Connect, and a few of the folk are here. So I've been on the ground from the beginning. But here's the problem. Getting folk engaged, getting folk involved. That's what I say about empathy and sympathy. Folk need to be restored. Folk need to be cared about. Folk need to be changed. folk need to know that somebody just, you know what, loves them. And I mean unconditional love. Not because of what I can get out of you, but because I feel what you feel. And so the problem with our communities is that I don't care what you do. You can pass out flyers, you can go and talk, you can knock on the door, and 5 folk will show up. But let something happen when some money's involved now. Let's offer some money. You get everybody and their mama and grandmama there. So what we have to do, and this is what we're doing with the AB 109, or with the realignment, or with reentry, and I call it new entry. And I call it reentry service, not work, because we're providing a service. Listen when I said new entry, because folk have never lived this way before. So it's new entry. It ain't re-entering to nothing. It's new entry. If you've been in the game for 40 years and you've been changed for 40 days, come on, y'all. You're learning how to live now. So this is new entry, not re-entry. So we got all these problems. We have all these concerns. So the thing that has to happen is that folk have got to get involved. And the governments have to allow formerly incarcerated folk have not to be afraid of new ideas that work. And like I said, the way you bring about change is to spend time with somebody. It's to be out there in the gutter with them. When they take a hit, be right there with them. When they find some dope, be right there with them. When they're acting a fool on their wife or their kid, be right there in the house with them. Is to spend time. And we can't wait for them to come to the program. We have to take the program to them. We have to. So in my 2 minutes, and I'll just use a minute of that there has to be empathy, y'all, from all of us, even those of us that are formerly incarcerated, because we are not doing it right too also. I'm also a member of All of Us at 9. And I know about the AB 218, I know about the ban in the box, all that stuff. And so there's so many issues and so many concerns that we have. But the county and the city governments, the communities that we live in, I'm going to close with this proverb. There's a proverb that says that, and I tell the young brothers this, because I say, you don't know how to lay no asphalt, and you don't know how to finish no concrete. So this block don't belong to you. So the proverb is that this is a Kenyan proverb. It says that the community that we live in was not given to us by our parents, but it was loaned to us by our children. And we must give it back to them better than what we received it. That's my time.
So I'm your last speaker, and I'm between you and lunch, so I'll make it quick here. We talked about accountability, and we talked about the budget. So in Santa Clara County, we built the foundation in terms of reentry through our Community Corrections Partnership Plan, and that was more regarding probation, the role of probation, and the role of Department of Correction and the Sheriff, custodial supervision. And then we developed an adult strategic plan, which was a collaboration of about 30 CBOs, community-based organizations, and community members. And that strategic plan defined 5 domains: housing, education, employment, health and well-being, and family reunification. So my role as the Director of Office of Reentry Services is to manage the budget and to work with our Chief Operating Officer in the county to figure out where should resources be placed. So, and in your packet, we gave you kind of a summary of how the funding is placed, how the funding is being allocated. And so for fiscal year 14, we decided to spend almost $12 million in health and well-being. So that's substance abuse treatment out in the community, mental health treatment out in the community, custody health. There was just mention about what are we doing in terms of the health of women in our jails. But we added to enhance the women's health treatment and men's treatment, we added about $1.8 million to our doctors and nurses in the jail to increase better mental health services. And then we talked about family reunification. We have a CBO that is helping the formerly incarcerated getting reconnected with their families. And then we also are engaged in a $4 million housing plan for over 2 years to look at how we could find permanent housing, transitional housing for our for our clients. And part of what we've done too is we've funded 3 faith-based collaborations. So we have a reentry resources, the main hub in the county, but we also have 3 resource centers that are run by faith-based organizations. And we're also doing a 4th one, and we have an RFP currently live now. So part of our building our foundation is where do we bring everyone together? Well, we're very fortunate that our Chief Executive Officer and our Chief Operating Officer dedicated a 40,000 square footage building to bring Department of Correction, Probation, Social Service Agency, Custody Health, Mental Health, Department of Alcohol and Drugs, Information Service Department, all in one place to help us bring that connection. And we're also expanding our services with the public defender in terms of expungement services. And just earlier last month, we have a mobile clinic. So we have a dedicated doctor and a nurse that comes 2 days a week to see patients, to see clients that are coming out of the jail. I'll just give you one example. We have the custody alternative supervision unit. So instead of folks in jail, they come and report to our resource center. Well, one individual had some anger issues and was coming late to his class. So then our Department of Corrections, our deputy sheriff, would then talk to our doctors that, can you see this person? Well, they realized that after so many years in prison, he was never diagnosed with being diabetic. And sure enough, they got him the treatment, and now he's doing much better. But having the doctor there at least twice a week, and we're trying to establish a permanent health clinic at our resource center to get that linkage of healthcare. And then hopefully later this month, we'll establish a day reporting center with our partner, Department of Correction and Rehabilitation, to also provide services to our parolees. And there was a lot of mention about the AB 109 client. Well, we've taken a liberal stance in terms of everyone is a reentry client. Yes, you're labeled AB 109, you're a PRCS 1170, but what about those Prop 36 3-strikers that are being released by state prison? So we've opened the doors for 3 strikers. We're closely working with the Public Defender's Office to identify the needs of the 3 strikers. So when I mentioned the funding for housing, we carved out funds to look for housing for our 3 strikers. And we also leverage our existing CBOs and the AB 109 contracted services to help with 3 strikers, to help with parolees, to help folks that are not labeled AB 109 clients. So what are some of the challenges that we faced? Well, I think earlier today there was talks about data. We don't have the data. And a lot of times we have a lot of departments that have their own case management system. They're not willing to share. And it's because of just legal issues, or that's just they work in silos. So we've embarked in a data warehouse system where all the information will be populated into a system, and then we could then look at the results of the clients, the results of the community-based organizations, how well are they providing the services to our clients. And then we also talked about case management system. Probation has a role, Department of Correction has a role in supervising the individual out in the community. But there's not much talk about how do we bring folks together at the table. So we established a reentry team, a team of county staff that will go into the jail to do those pre-release assessments, and then to help with linking them, the clients, to the community-based organization services. And then we've also used some of our AB 109 funds to hire peer mentors and rehab counselors to link those individuals with case management services. And then now when we look at the case system or the risk needs assessment, we're very fortunate that probation and now the Department of Correction and Sheriff have the same risk needs assessment, so that information can be easily used and transferred with case managers. And based on that risk needs assessment, one of the biggest things that we've identified is mental health issues, substance abuse. So we're looking at enhancing our residential bed capacity. A lot of our judges are telling us, I would rather send an individual to a residential treatment bed than in jail. We have about 130 folks waiting to be out to residential beds. So right now we're working on diverting funds that are being unused from departments to enhance our residential treatment beds. And that's one thing that one of the the challenges that we recognize is when we look at our funding, everyone has a budget. But then we tell people, if you don't spend it, it's going to be reallocated. Or as we meet monthly with our leadership group, with all the department heads, and we're identifying needs, I'm instructed to go back and see where could I find more resources. And so right now we're looking at reallocating our funds to look at where we can meet the greatest needs. And right now it's our residential substance abuse treatment beds. One of the things that we've talked about is breaking down the silos, well, and accountability. So every month we have a stakeholder group meeting that we work with our CBOs so we understand what is going on in terms of them providing the services. How can we tweak our systems in getting the right information? We're also looking at other funding. Very, very fortunate. Last year, the voters of Santa Clara approved a sales tax increase. And so we're looking at how can we leverage some of that sales tax increase to enhance our reentry efforts in Santa Clara County. There was talks about the law enforcement. I live in a small community in Gilroy, and our paper, our local newspaper is always saying, oh, there's more PRCS folks, more folks are coming out of the jail, crime is going to go up. Well, now, as the Director of Reentry Services, I went out and I'm meeting with the chiefs of police, both in Gilroy and Morgan Hill. How can we better educate the law enforcement to understand who the clients are and what services we're providing? So that's one of the challenges and one of the ways we're meeting that challenge. So I leave you with the thought about transparency. I think Rebecca and Pastor Harris were talking about accountability and budget. We gave you as a handout our budget. How are we spending our funds? And I believe it's very important to let the community know this is how we're spending funds and doing interim evaluation. I think we were the first in the state to hire an independent evaluator to tell us how we're doing our first year. Well, we hired them back to come back and look at long-term evaluation. How can we enhance our program? And that's Resource Development Associates based in Oakland. And we're now going to be doing focus groups with individuals to help us identify better needs. So thank you.
Hi, I'm Assemblymember Skinner, introduced before, but I'll deal with the questions for this panel. First, there was a question for our formerly incarcerated panelists, and the question was, how do you manage the anger at those accountability forums you hold, or at the inside when you were talking about the when you confronted the victims' accountability, right? So from the family members of the victims themselves, how do you handle that? And what is the key way you feel being accountable?
We actually prepare before that circle take place, and what we talk about it, and it's like we leave that space open for the survivor to speak whatever's on their mind and to let that out, because we believe that when they let that out, there's healing involved. So we want to be sensitive to their words and just be present with them. And it's about all of our healing, but we have preparation work that we do before that take place. And I think for me, as far as accountability in my life, it was so much going on, and I was at a point of rock bottom to where I had nowhere to look but up. And there was a lot of guilt and shame in my heart. So that for my own healing, it was like accountability became necessary. Without it, I couldn't move forward.
That's hard to follow. That's exactly what I went through. Understanding where the person sitting across from you is in life, and for healing to take place, we talk about a holistic view of what this is, a restorative view of what this is, and this has to take place. This has to take place if we're to move forward with our lives in growth and understanding of, again, what we've done to ourselves, to society as a whole. This has to take place, and once I was asked by a person well, did they forgive you? You know? And I think what I learned most from this program is that forgiveness is selfish. Really, it is, because if I was to ask for forgiveness, it would be a self act. And so just understanding what the person has felt and gone through in life is what it's all about, and understanding that.
Another question that was raised is, because now we have longer sentences, many of our folks that are going to be released are older, seniors. And yet, during prison time, they did not accumulate Social Security benefits, and while they worked in prison, they weren't paid a living wage. So what might we do? Either paying them a living wage or allowing for the Social Security so that when they are out, they have some financial support in their old age. I don't know if there's any panelists who want to comment to that.
I'll comment to that, if you don't mind.
Okay.
I was 49 years old when I was released, and I recognized early on that after being released, it was just not realistic that I was going to work for a company, have a retirement, and be able to satisfy my family or in the later years of my life. So recognizing that, and I would impress upon this investment of community, right? So I decided to start a small business. And from that, I recognized that it's like a culmination of the things I have went through in my life. A small business is developing relationships. It's about, people calling you back, right, because of your work ethic. And I learned all that in prison, believe it or not. So, I would impress upon this panel and any panel that we would invest in our older population as well. They're coming home. And their recidivism is immeasurable because they don't want to go back. They're done, So these people that have a lot of time in prison, their success is dependent upon them understanding of maybe how to run a small business or employ themselves. And so, again, I would impress upon the education of that. I've never seen that inside of those environments where Small Business Association is directly related to teaching people about opening their own company or investment in that. So, thank you.
There was another question about what efforts were being made in Alameda County and specifically Oakland to engage our children in schools with the goal of violence prevention and to address the trauma that they may be experiencing being exposed to violence in their neighborhoods. And I'll just answer part of that. There was a forum broadcast on KQED last night that had many speakers from Oakland Unified School District about Oakland School District's own restorative justice program, about their attempts to reduce the number of suspensions they're making, because, of course, when you suspend kids from school, and what they cited is that most suspensions were young men of color, and the reason for suspension was called defiance, which is not a very defined term, but when you do those suspensions, then they're not in school, and then they are either subject to violence themselves or potentially perpetrators of violence. So there's quite a lot of focus within OUSD to deal with that, but the portion about the trauma that kids may be experiencing being exposed to violence, I have less information about.
Well, I do think that Oakland has developed a community schools concept, which I think is a brilliant idea, which is that every school should also reach out to the surrounding community, hopefully have a health clinic in it, have an after-school program, invite the families in. Some of these community schools have job training classes, English classes for the parents. We need the adequate funding, but I think that the ideas that are being put forward right now in OUSD are very, very, very good ones and very positive ones, and they need community involvement to make it all real.
So then we have a comment from a audience member who's involved in Solano County reentry, thanking all of the panelists and people here and indicating that, asking to don't stop, both on the work on the inside and the outside, and mentioned that this person's brother committed suicide in San Quentin and was never able to get past all of the hurdles of reintegration, and expressed appreciation for the efforts both on work with folks incarcerated and those formerly to try to address that. And the last question was for Javier Aguirre. Wanted to know what steps were being taken to re-educate the police force, and how successful do you think they've been?
Well, I've been in my role for a month. And so prior to that, I've been co-administering the public safety realignment. So as it indicated earlier, there's a lot of efforts in the county, and one of them is the Community Transformation Grant through the federal government. And I'm sitting on that, and that's for South County, which is this, Gilroy and Morgan Hill. And Gilroy is probably like the third largest city that has a lot of the AB 109 individuals residing there. And so, as I mentioned earlier, it's basically making those contacts and ensuring that our law enforcement know what resources we provide. And so I've been in contact with the police chiefs down in Gilroy and Morgan Hill. I'm also working with the Sunnyvale Police Department to really educate and let them know what resources we provide. But I think it's important to know that we have some champions in the county. We're very fortunate that our supervisor, Joseph Midian, a former state senator, is our chair for public safety and justice. And we need to leverage him and other county elected officials to work with our law enforcement. But one of our strategies has been, in terms of our resource center, is having our Department of Corrections, probation, and now our office to come together and invite law enforcement to educate. So that's one of the initiatives that I'm going to be undertaking in the next few months.
Thank you. That is the signal, everybody, for our break for lunch. We're going to reconvene the Center Force part of the afternoon at 1:20. Let me just say that the forum has been videotaped, and there'll be a link on my website that you can all use. And if you give us your email, we'll send you a link to the videotape directly so that you can share any or all of it with the groups that you belong to. And I think probably the assembly members who are here would be interested in doing that as well. I learned a tremendous amount from all of you today, from the panelists, from the people I talked with during the break. And I want to emphasize this is the beginning. This is just the beginning of a public conversation and a mobilization of the positive forces in the community to take these ideas and make them what is normally done instead of best practices, you know, that we applaud from the innovators that forge the way in this new world that is full of positive opportunity if we take them. I've heard so many things today that meant a lot to me. One of them really was the idea that we all have to come together from the law enforcement side, from the community side. We have to be accountable to one another. We have to understand what each other's fears and hopes are for themselves, and that using the skills and the empathy and the talent and the wisdom of formerly incarcerated people is going to be key to that, because they have walked the walk, and there are so many ways in which what they learn can give back to us. So I think that we will all be working together on this. All of us here sit on the public safety committees in the Senate and the Assembly. Assemblywoman Skinner chairs the Budget Committee. We'll chair the Budget Committee in the Assembly. I chair the Senate I'm on the Budget Committee. I chair the subcommittee on prisons, jails, and courts. So if, again, we work together in this way, I think that we can build on what we're learning today and what we will learn in the future to make change real in all of our lives. And I wonder if Assemblywoman Skinner or Assemblyman Quirk want to add anything.
I'll just thank all the people who were on the panels, all of you for being here today. I will work very closely with Senator Hancock and Assemblymember Skinner and the other members of the Assembly and the Senate, and hopefully we can put some of the best practices, as the Senator says, into becoming routine practices. Thank you.
I want to thank the panelists, but also all of you for your interest and your participation today. And as Senator Hancock mentioned, in addition to my being on the Public Safety Committee, I do chair the Assembly Budget Committee. And there's clearly in the discussion today, there's many things we need to do just in our neighborhoods and our communities. There's things we need to do on the city level, on the county level. There's legislation that the state should consider. But there's also some what could be considered relatively simple budget items, such as the elimination of the prohibition on a person who is a felon from being able to get CalFresh. And what I think that we would want to look for, and we already have beginning of a list like that, but some of those perhaps things that legislatively maybe, not that they would be hard, but maybe it's not worth carrying a bill around these kind of smaller, and maybe there's some things we could just put into the budget, hopefully. But we want to start collecting lists like that, and we welcome input in that regard. The other thing I want to mention is I also have a bill on the governor's desk, AB 720, and many of our panelists have talked about the health care needs. And what 720 does is, if you have Medi-Cal already, but you're then put in a county facility, what happens now is your Medi-Cal is suspended. That's absurd, because the Medi-Cal could continue, you could continue to get services while you're in the county facility. So 720 would stop the discontinuation of your Medi-Cal once you're incarcerated, but additionally, it would ask the counties to enroll you, if you're eligible for Medi-Cal and you don't have it, enroll you in Medi-Cal 30 days before your release, so that as soon as you're released, you already have that Medi-Cal and you're already able, by our different reentry programs and community-based groups, you're already able to be put into, whether it's mental health service you need, other medical care, or substance abuse, because you have that Medi-Cal, and you're not having to go and enroll in it. So that's on the governor's desk right now. He hasn't signed it yet. I don't have an indication that he won't, but if you support something like that, we need to tell him, sign it. So I look forward to working with all of you, and appreciate this event.
There is lunch next door for the people who are staying for the afternoon session.